Introduction to Cognitive Science. Welcome to your first lesson. We will begin our study tonight with the broadest and perhaps the oldest of questions. What is a mind? What does it mean to think? And how can we, as scientists, possibly begin to study something as private, as complex, and as intangible as the human mind? This first segment is our foundation. It is the solid ground upon which all our other lessons will be built. We will define the field of cognitive science, and we will establish the core ideas that will guide our entire journey tonight. There is no rush. We will take our time, allowing each concept to settle. Let us begin. So, what is cognitive science? At its simplest, cognitive science is the interdisciplinary, scientific study of the mind and its processes. The most important word in that definition is interdisciplinary. This means that cognitive science is not one single field, like chemistry or biology, with its own distinct set of rules. Instead, think of cognitive science as a grand collaboration. It is a team of specialists, all from different fields, bringing their own unique tools and perspectives to study the same complex subject, your mind. Let's briefly meet this team. First, we have psychologists, specifically cognitive psychologists. They are interested in the processes of the mind, the functions. They design careful experiments to understand how humans perceive the world, how we pay attention, how we learn, and how we solve problems. Then, we have neuroscientists. Neuroscientists are concerned with the physical hardware of the mind, the brain. They study the intricate network of billions of cells, called neurons, mapping the neural pathways and the chemical signals that give rise to every thought you have. We also have linguists. Linguists study the structure of human language. They ask one of the great mysteries of our field: how are we able, so effortlessly, to produce and understand such an infinite variety of complex sentences? Alongside them are philosophers, specifically philosophers of mind. They have been asking these questions the longest. They tackle the deep, foundational questions, such as, what is consciousness? What is the relationship between the physical brain and the subjective experience of the mind? And finally, we have computer scientists. This may seem surprising, but computer scientists are crucial to the team. They work in the field of artificial intelligence, attempting to build computational models of the mind's processes. They test our theories by trying to simulate thinking, learning, and language. Psychology, neuroscience, linguistics, philosophy, and computer science. These are the core pillars of cognitive science. With all these different fields, you might wonder what single idea unites them. What is the core assumption that holds this collaboration together? It is this: the mind is an information processor. Let that concept settle in. The mind as an information processor. This is the central analogy of cognitive science. Just like a computer, the mind takes in information from the world. This is sensation and perception. It stores and organizes that information. This is memory and learning. It manipulates that information. This is reasoning, planning, and problem solving. And finally, it produces an output. That output could be a spoken word, a physical action, or simply an internal thought or decision. This is often called the computational theory of mind. We are not saying the mind is a digital computer. The brain is biological, wet, complex, and far more sophisticated. But we are saying that what the mind does, its function, is computation. It processes information. This guiding principle is what allows a neuroscientist studying a neuron and a linguist studying a sentence to be working on the same fundamental problem. This way of thinking about the mind as an information processor is actually quite new. For the first half of the 20th century, the study of the mind, especially in America, was dominated by a field called behaviorism. The most famous behaviorist was B.F. Skinner. Behaviorists believed that the internal mental world, your thoughts, your feelings, your intentions, was a black box. They argued that it was unscientific, perhaps even impossible. He's wrecked to study it directly. All we could scientifically study, they claimed, was observable behavior. We could measure the stimuluses that went into an organism, such as a sound, and the response that came out, such as a physical action. But we were forbidden from asking about what happened in between. This all began to change in the mid-1950s, in what we now call the cognitive revolution. A new generation of scholars began to argue that we must open the black box. We must find a way to study thinking itself. One of the key figures was the linguist Noam Chomsky. Chomsky famously argued that behaviorism simply could not explain human language. He pointed out that children produce sentences they have never heard before. They are not just mimicking a stimulus they learned. They must have an internal mental set of rules, a kind of universal grammar operating in their minds. This was a direct challenge to behaviorism, and it helped open the door to studying internal mental structures. At around the same time, a psychologist at Harvard named George Miller published a paper that would become one of the most famous in psychology. It was titled The Magical Number 7 plus or minus 2. Through a series of very clever, simple experiments, Miller showed that the human mind can only hold about 7 chunks of information, plus or minus 2, in its short-term memory at one time. This finding was revolutionary, not just for the fact itself, but because it was a scientific, measurable, objective look inside the black box. He was measuring the capacity of a mental process. The revolution had begun. Scientists were finally given permission to study the mind itself, to study thinking, memory, and perception as real, tangible, and measurable processes. This was the birth of modern cognitive science. So, why is this field important to you as you rest here, listening? Understanding the foundations of cognitive science is the first step toward understanding ourselves. The principles we will cover tonight, these lessons on memory, attention, and learning, are not just abstract theories. They are, in a very real sense, the user manual for your own mind. This field helps us understand how we learn a new skill or a new language. It helps us understand why we sometimes make irrational decisions and how we can learn to make better ones. It explains how our attention works and why it sometimes fails. The technology you are likely using to listen to this right now, the smart assistants on our phones, the recommendation algorithms on websites, the artificial intelligence that is becoming part of our world. These are all built on the principles of cognitive science, on models of how we process information. By studying this field, we are studying the software that makes us human. We have now established our guiding analogy for the lessons to come, the mind as an information processor. We will be studying the mind as a complex software, running its programs of thought, memory, and perception. But, as any computer scientist will tell you, software cannot run without hardware. Before we can truly understand these abstract processes, these programs of the mind, we must first have a basic map of the physical machine it runs on. We must look, however briefly, at the organ of thought itself. Our next lesson will provide a calm, clear overview of the cognitive brain, the intricate hardware of human consciousness. The cognitive brain, key structures. In our first lesson, we established our guiding idea that the mind can be understood as a remarkable information processor, a kind of software running the complex programs of thought. This lesson explores the physical hardware on which that software runs, the organ of thought itself, the brain. We will not attempt to cover the entire, vast complexity of neuroanatomy. Our journey is focused. This lesson will serve as a brief overview of the key structures that are most central to our topics tonight. the parts of the brain that allow you to think, to learn, and to remember. Think of this as creating a basic map, a guide to the most important locations in the landscape of the mind, so that as we continue, you will have a sense of where these processes are taking place. There is nothing to memorize. Simply relax and let us tour this incredible structure together. Your brain, resting inside your skull, is the most complex object in the known universe. It is a 3-pound mass of soft tissue composed of water, fats, and proteins. But its true power comes from its cells. The primary building blocks of the brain are specialized cells called neurons. You have an estimated 86 billion of them. Each neuron is a tiny information processor in its own right. They are like the wires and switches of a living computer. Neurons communicate with each other using a combination of electrical signals which travel down their long arms, and chemical signals called neurotransmitters, which jump the tiny gap, or synapse, to the next cell. This continuous silent electrical and chemical storm, this network of billions of cells, firing in intricate patterns, is the physical basis for every thought, every feeling, and every memory you have. Now, let us zoom out and look at the brain's largest and most dominant structure. This is the cerebral cortex. The cortex is the wrinkled, folded outer layer of the brain, the part you would typically picture in your mind. This wrinkling is a clever biological trick. It allows a huge surface area, packed with neurons, to be folded up to fit inside the skull. If you were to unfold the human cortex, it would be about the size of a large pillowcase. This structure is the headquarters of higher cognition. It is where the most complex thinking occurs. This cortex is divided, much like a map, into 4 main territories, or lobes. Each lobe specializes in different kinds of information processing. Let us begin at the very back of the brain. Here we find the occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is almost entirely devoted to one crucial task: processing vision. Information from your eyes travels all the way to the back of your brain, where the occipital lobe takes the raw data of light, shadow, and color, and begins to construct the meaningful, 3-dimensional world you see around you. Now, let us move to the sides of the brain, just behind your temples, near your ears. These are the temporal lobes. Given their location, it is no surprise that they are the primary centers for processing sound and for understanding language. When you listen to these words, it is your left temporal lobe, in a region called Wernicke's area, that is working to extract meaning from the sounds. The temporal lobes are also vital for recognizing faces and objects. Moving upward, to the top and upper back of the brain, we find the parietal lobe. The parietal lobe is the brain's center for touch, temperature, and pain. It contains a detailed map of your entire body, allowing you to know where you are being touched. It also plays a critical role in spatial awareness. Your internal sense of where your body is in space, and how to navigate the world without bumping into things. Finally, we arrive at the front of the brain, right behind your forehead. This is the frontal lobe. It is the largest of the 4 lobes, and in many ways, the most human. The frontal lobe is your center for planning, for reasoning, for making judgments, and for controlling your voluntary movements. It is the seat of your personality and your self-control. We have now mapped the 4 great continents of the cortex, but for our topics tonight, learning and memory, we must look deeper, beneath the surface, to 2 smaller but critically important structures. The first is a structure called the hippocampus. Its name comes from the Greek word for seahorse, because its curved shape resembles that small sea creature. The hippocampus is nestled deep inside the temporal lobe. Think of the hippocampus as the save button for your new memories. It is not where memories are stored long-term. That happens in the vast networks of the cortex. Rather, The hippocampus is the essential mechanism that forms new explicit memories. That is, memories of facts, like the ones in this lesson, and memories of events, like what you did yesterday. It takes your immediate, short-term experiences and begins the process of consolidating them, of making them stable and permanent, so they can be filed away in the cortex for later retrieval. It is a gateway through which new knowledge must pass to be truly learned. The second structure we must explore is at the very front of the frontal lobe. This area is called the prefrontal cortex, or PFC. If the brain is a company, then the prefrontal cortex is its chief executive officer, its CEO. This is the most recently evolved part of the human brain, and it is the part that handles your highest executive functions. The prefrontal cortex is what allows you to set long-term goals, to make complex decisions, to weigh consequences, and to moderate your social behavior. It is the part of your brain that overrides your immediate impulses. When you choose to do something difficult but necessary, it is your prefrontal cortex at work. It is also the conductor of your attention, helping you focus your mental spotlight, just as you are doing now, as you listen to these words. These structures are not abstract. They are working at every moment. As you listen to this lesson, your temporal lobes are processing the sound of my voice. Your occipital lobes are processing the darkness behind your closed eyelids. When you try to remember the name hippocampus, your prefrontal cortex is directing your attention, and your hippocampus is working to encode that new word, linking it to the concept of a save button for memory. The importance of these structures is most clear when they are damaged. The most famous case in neuroscience is that of a man named Phineas Gage. In 1848, Gage was a railroad worker who survived a terrible accident where an iron rod passed completely through the front of his skull, destroying a large part of his prefrontal cortex. Miraculously, Gage survived. He could still walk, talk, and remember his past, but he was no longer Gage. His friends said he was a different person. This polite, responsible man became impulsive, rude, and unable to make plans or stick to a job. His executive was gone. This tragic case was the first real evidence that this specific part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, is the seat of our personality, our judgment, and our ability to plan. In the same way, patients who suffer damage to their hippocampus, like the famous patient H.M., can lose the ability to form any new memories. They can remember their childhood, but they cannot remember what they had for breakfast, or a person they met just minutes ago. Their save button is broken. This physical hardware, these lobes and structures, are the very foundation of who you are. We have now seen the brain's physical structure. We have mapped its key locations, the hardware for our cognitive software. We know that this system is built to process information, but this leads us to the next logical question. How does information from the outside world, the light, sounds, textures, and smells of your environment, actually get into this complex system to be processed? This is the first step in all cognition. It is the bridge between the world and the mind. Our next lesson will explore this bridge, the fundamental processes of sensation and perception. Sensation and perception, constructing reality. In our last lesson, we explored the physical map of the brain, the intricate hardware that serves as the stage for all our thoughts. We have this complex machine ready to process information. This brings us to the next, most fundamental question. How does information from the outside world, the light from the stars, the sound of the wind, the feeling of the sheets against your skin, how does all of this get into the brain to be processed? This is the very first step in all cognition. It is the bridge that connects your internal private mind to the external shared world. This bridge is not a single pathway, but a crucial two-step process. Tonight, in this lesson, we will explore these two processes, sensation and perception. We will learn how you do not just passively see the world, but actively construct it. Let us begin this part of our journey. First, let us define our terms clearly. These two words, sensation and perception, are often used interchangeably in daily life. But in cognitive science, they mean two very different, sequential things. Let us start with sensation. Sensation is the passive physical process of our sense organs detecting raw stimuli from the environment. Think of your sense organs, your eyes, your ears, your nose, your skin, as biological data collectors. They are like the microphones for a recording, the lens for a camera. Their job is to detect basic forms of energy. Light waves, which are just electromagnetic radiation, strike the retina at the back of your eye. Sound waves, which are just vibrations in the air, vibrate the tiny bones in your ear. Chemical molecules floating in the air land on receptors in your nose. This detection, this raw, unfiltered, meaningless data is sensation. It is the input file. It is the on or off signal from a billion tiny switches. It is objective, but by itself, it is not useful. This brings us to the second and truly magical step, perception. Perception is the active cognitive process of organizing, identifying, and interpreting that raw sensory data to make it meaningful. If sensation is the raw data file, perception is your brain opening the file and rendering the image, or the song, or the idea. Perception is where the software of the mind takes over. It is your brain taking the raw data of light waves, sensation, and interpreting it as a recognizable object, a face, a tree, or the words on a page, perception. It is your brain taking the raw vibrations in the air, sensation, and interpreting them as a beautiful piece of music, or the meaning of the words, I am speaking right now, perception. Sensation is the data, perception is the experience. Let that distinction settle for a moment. You and another person may have the exact same sensation. The same light waves may enter both of your eyes. But how you perceive that light, what you see, can be wonderfully, and sometimes profoundly, different. So, how does the brain achieve this incredible feat? How does it turn the noise of sensation into the meaning of perception? It does this by using two different types of processing, working together at all times. The first method is called bottom-up processing. As the name suggests, this is processing that starts at the bottom, with the raw sensory data, and works its way up to the brain's higher centers for interpretation. Think of it as data-first processing. Your brain is acting like a detective, assembling clues. When you see something for the very first time, an abstract painting, or a strange new tropical fruit, you are using bottom-up processing. Your brain has no existing file for this object, so it must analyze the basic features. It sees lines, curves, angles, colors, and textures. It assembles these pieces, piece by piece, until it can form a complete picture, a coherent perception of this new thing. It is slow, it is analytical, and it is how we build our first understanding of the world. But we do not just rely on bottom-up processing. If we did, our world would be slow and exhausting. Every single moment would be like seeing things for the first time. This is why we have the second method, which is far more powerful, top-down processing. As the name implies, this processing starts at the top, with your mind's existing knowledge, your memories, your expectations, and your beliefs. And it works its way down to influence what you perceive. This is concept-first processing. Your brain is not a passive receiver of information, it is an active predictor. It is constantly making its best guess about what is out there in the world, based on your entire life's experience. And it uses the incoming sensory data to confirm or correct those predictions. Here is a simple example. If you are in your kitchen in the dark and you see a familiar, blurry, rectangular shape on the counter, you will instantly perceive it as your coffee maker. You do not need to do a slow, bottom-up analysis of its lines and curves. Your brain, using top-down processing, says, "I am in the kitchen. I expect to see a coffee maker on this counter. This shape matches my memory of it. Therefore, it is the coffee maker." Optical illusions are a perfect demonstration of top-down processing at work. Consider the famous illusion of the two faces and the vase. The sensory data, the black and white lines on the page, never changes. That is the sensation. But your perception, guided by your brain's top-down models for face and vase, actively flips between the two. Your brain is trying to fit the data into one of its pre-existing files, and in this case, both files are a good fit. This proves, beautifully, that your perception is an active construction, not a passive copy, of reality. This distinction between sensation and perception is not just an academic exercise. It is fundamental to your entire experience of the world. It is the very foundation of your subjective reality. It explains why two people can go to the same party or watch the same political debate and have completely different experiences. Their sensations might be nearly identical. They hear the same words, they see the same events, but their top-down processing, shaped by their unique memories, beliefs, and expectations, leads them to form radically different perceptions of what happened. This is why eyewitness testimony in a courtroom can be so unreliable. A witness's memory is not a recording of the raw sensation, it is a recording of their perception. A perception that was already filtered and interpreted by their brain's biases and expectations in that stressful moment. Understanding this process allows you to have a deeper appreciation for how your own mind works. It is a reminder that what you see is a blend of what is really there, and what your mind, based on your past, expects to be there. It is a creative partnership between the world and your mind. We have now established that our senses are constantly gathering a flood of raw data, a storm of sensations, and our brain, through perception, works to organize and interpret this data. But this leads to a new, critical problem. At this very moment, your ears are sensing sounds in the room. Your skin is sensing the temperature. Your eyes, even when closed, are sensing changes in light. The amount of raw data flowing into your system is overwhelming. Millions of bits of information every second. It is impossible for the brain to process all of it. It cannot build a perception for every single sensation. Therefore, the mind needs a filter. It needs a mechanism to select from that deafening roar of information what is important and what can be ignored. It needs a mental spotlight. Our next lesson explores this crucial mental filter, the process of attention, the nature of attention. In our last lesson, we learned how our senses are flooded at every single moment with a torrent of raw data. We are bombarded with light, sounds, textures, and smells. We also learned that our brain, through the process of perception, actively constructs our reality by organizing and interpreting this data. But this leads to a critical logistical problem. The brain simply does not have the capacity, the energy, or the resources to process every single piece of information the world sends it. If it tried, the result would be an overwhelming, chaotic roar of noise, a state of total confusion. To function, the mind must have a way to filter this storm. It needs a mechanism to select what is important and what is merely background noise, to be ignored. It must choose what to let in for further processing. This lesson is about that filter. It is about the most crucial and, perhaps most limited, of all your mental resources. This lesson is on the nature of attention. So, what is attention? At its core, attention is the cognitive process of selectively concentrating on one piece of information, one stimulus, while ignoring other, competing information. The most common and useful analogy for attention is that of a mental spotlight. Imagine you are in a dark room and you are holding a single spotlight. The room is full of objects, furniture, paintings, books, but you can only see the one object that your beam of light is currently resting on. Everything else remains in the shadows, unseen. This is exactly how your attention operates. Your mind is that dark room, full of sensory information. Your attention is the spotlight. You can move this spotlight. Right now, you might be focused on the sound of my voice, but you could, with a simple act of will, shift your attention. You could move the spotlight to the feeling of the blankets on your skin or to the temperature of the air in your room. You can also change the focus of the spotlight. You can narrow its beam to a tiny point, such as when you are trying to thread a needle or find a single word on a page. Or you can widen the beam to a broad floodlight setting, such as when you are driving and you need to be generally aware of the entire road, the mirrors, and the dashboard all at once. But the most important truth about this spotlight, the one central fact of this lesson, is that you only have one of them. Attention is a limited resource. You cannot shine your spotlight in two places at once. You may think you can, a state we call multitasking. But as we will see, this is an illusion. What you are actually doing is switching the spotlight back and forth, very, very quickly. And every time you switch, you pay a small mental price. This selective, limited spotlight is the gateway to all higher thinking. Nothing can be learned. Nothing can be remembered. Nothing can be considered unless it first passes through this narrow beam. This concept of a filter is beautifully illustrated by a classic phenomenon known as the cocktail party effect. I would like you to picture yourself, if you are still awake, at a crowded, noisy party. There are dozens of conversations happening all around you. Music is playing. People are laughing. The sensation, the raw sound data hitting your ears, is a chaotic mess of noise. And yet, you can, with seeming effort, tune all of it out. You can aim your mental spotlight with precision and focus only on the voice of the person you are speaking with. Their words are clear and understandable, while all other conversations fade into a muffled, meaningless background hum. This is selective attention in action. You have applied your filter. But here is the most fascinating part of the effect. If someone, across the room, in a conversation you were not attending to, suddenly says your name, your attention instantly snaps to them. What does this tell us? It tells us that your filter is not a complete solid wall. Your brain must have been monitoring that unattended conversation at a very low, subconscious level, just enough to scan for one critically important signal, your name. This shows how complex and dynamic your attentional system truly is. While the cocktail party effect shows the power of your spotlight, there is an opposite and equally striking phenomenon that shows its limits. This is called inattentional blindness. Inattentional blindness is the failure to see a fully visible, and often quite obvious, object or event, simply because your attention, your spotlight, is focused elsewhere. The most famous experiment on this was conducted in 1999 by the psychologists Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris. In their study, they asked participants to watch a video of two teams, one in white shirts, one in black shirts, passing basketballs. The task was to count, very carefully, the number of passes made by the team in white. As the participants diligently focused their spotlight, counting the passes, a person in a full gorilla costume walked directly into the middle of the game and stopped, beat its chest, and then walked calmly off the other side. The gorilla was on screen for a full 9 seconds. The shocking result? Fully half, 50%, of the participants did not see the gorilla at all. They had no memory of it. When shown the video again, they were stunned. This was not a failure of their eyes. The gorilla was there. The sensation of light from it hit their retinas. This was a failure of attention. Their mental spotlight was so narrowly focused on the white shirts and the basketballs that a gorilla, in plain sight, was rendered completely invisible to their conscious mind. It was outside the beam. This is a profound truth. You only perceive, you are only aware of, that tiny fraction of the world that your attention illuminates. The rest, for all intents and purposes, does not exist for you. This lesson on the nature of attention is perhaps the most practical of our entire course. The ability to control this spotlight, to direct it where you want, and to hold it there against distraction, is the single most important skill for learning. When you sit down to study, the difference between success and failure is not the time you spend, but the quality of attention you invest. You can stare at a page in a book for an hour, but if your spotlight is drifting, thinking about your day, or a message on your phone, almost none of that information will pass the gateway. It is not being processed. By contrast, 20 minutes of deep, focused, uninterrupted attention, your spotlight held steady, then is more effective than hours of distracted study. In our modern world, with smartphones and endless notifications, we are living in an economy designed to hijack your spotlight. Every ping, every like, every breaking news alert is an attempt by someone else to grab your attention. This makes the conscious, deliberate control of your own focus a true superpower. Attention is the gateway to memory. You cannot remember what you did not first pay attention to. All the information we will cover in our upcoming lessons on memory, on learning, on problem solving, it all presupposes that attention has been paid first. It is the prerequisite for all conscious thought. We have now followed the path of information. It begins as raw sensation. It is selected by the filter of attention. But what happens next? Once a piece of information, a word, a name, a number, or an idea has been successfully illuminated by our spotlight, where does it go? It does not go straight into permanent storage. It must first enter a temporary mental workspace, a kind of mental scratch pad. This is the active, conscious part of your mind where you hold information right now to work with it. Our next lesson begins our deep exploration of memory, starting with this temporary, active, and essential system, the RAM of your mind, known as working memory. The structure of working memory. Welcome to our study of memory. In our previous lesson, we established that the spotlight of attention is the gateway to our mind. It selects what is important from the endless stream of sensation. Now, we must ask, where does that information go? Once a thought, a name, or a number passes through the gateway of attention, where is it held? It does not go immediately into the vast permanent library of your long-term memory. It must first land in a temporary, active, and very small workspace. This is the mental scratch pad where you hold and actively work with information in your conscious awareness. This lesson explores this critical, temporary storage system. We will examine its structure, its profound limitations, and its incredible power. This is the system known as working memory. You may be familiar with the older term, short-term memory. For many years, scientists pictured this system as a simple, passive storage box. A small shelf where you could place a few items for a brief time before they were either lost or moved to a bigger warehouse. However, in cognitive science today, we use the more accurate and descriptive term, working memory. The change in name is important. It shifts our analogy from a passive storage box to an active mental workbench. Or, to use a modern analogy, think of working memory as the RAM on a computer. Your long-term memory is like the computer's massive hard drive. It can store a vast, almost limitless, amount of information for years. But to do anything with that information, to open a file, to edit a document, to run a program. The computer must first load that information from the hard drive into its active high-speed RAM. Your working memory serves this exact function for your mind. It is the limited, active workspace where you pull information out of your long-term storage and combine it with new information from your senses to think, to solve a problem, or to understand a sentence. This system has two defining and severe limitations. First, it has a very short duration. Information only stays in this active workspace for about 15 to 30 seconds, unless you actively do something to keep it there. The most common way you do this is through rehearsal, simply repeating the information over and over to yourself. Second, it has a very small capacity. It simply cannot hold much information at once. This workbench is not a large factory floor. It is a very small, cluttered desk. This limitation is one of the most fundamental bottlenecks in all of human thinking. Just how small is this capacity? In 1956, a psychologist at Harvard University named George Miller published one of the most famous papers in the history of psychology. It was titled The Magical Number 7 plus or minus 2. After reviewing numerous studies, Miller proposed that the capacity of our short-term memory is, on average, about 7 items, give or take 2. For some people, it might be 5 items. For others, it might be 9. But for almost everyone, it is in this very small range. This is why, when you are given a new phone number, you can usually hold it in your head just long into dial. But if you are given a 10-digit confirmation code, you almost certainly have to write it down. But Miller also pointed out a clever way that our minds hack this limitation. We do it through a process called chunking. Chunking is the cognitive process of grouping individual, separate items into larger, more meaningful, familiar units. Here is a clear example. If I gave you this list of 12 letters to remember, F, B, I, C, I, A, N, S, A, N, F, L, you would find it almost impossible. 12 items far exceeds the magical number 7. But what if I grouped them like this? FBI, CIA, NSA, NFL. Now, it is trivially easy. You have not changed the letters, but you have chunked them. You have used your long-term memory, your knowledge of these acronyms, to compress those 12 individual bits of information into 4 meaningful chunks. And 4 chunks fits easily into your working memory. This is your mind's software cleverly working around its own hardware limitations. In the 1970 seconds, 2 cognitive psychologists named Alan Baddeley and Graham Hitch proposed a much more detailed and influential model. They argued that working memory is not just one single workbench. Instead, it is a multi-component system, a CEO with a couple of specialized assistants. At the top, they proposed the central executive. This is the CEO of the system. It is the worker at the workbench. This component, which we believe resides in your prefrontal cortex, is the true attention controller. It doesn't store information itself, but it directs your focus. It decides what to pay attention to. It pulls information from long-term memory, and it sends tasks to its assistant systems. The first assistant is called the phonological loop. This is your inner voice and your inner ear. It is a short-term buffer that holds and rehearses verbal and auditory information. When you are silently repeating a phone number to yourself to remember it, you are using your phonological loop. The sound of the words is looping in this temporary buffer. The second assistant is called the visuospatial sketchpad. This is your inner eye. It is a separate buffer that holds and manipulates visual and spatial information. When you are asked to picture your house and count the windows, or when you try to figure out if a sofa will fit in your living room by mentally rotating it, you are using your visuospatial sketchpad. This multi-part structure explains why you can, for example, rehearse a phone number in your phonological loop while simultaneously picturing a map in your visuospatial sketchpad. These two assistants can work at the same time, as long as the tasks do not compete. You are using your working memory at this very moment. To understand this sentence, your phonological loop is holding the beginning of the sentence, while your central executive integrates it with the end of the sentence to extract the full meaning. Without working memory, language would be impossible. You would forget the start of a word before you heard its end. Working memory is the essence of focus. When you are following a recipe, you hold the step "add 2 cups of flour" in your working memory as you turn to the counter to perform the action. If you get distracted and your attention shifts, that instruction is dropped from the workbench. This is the simple, frustrating experience of walking into a room and completely forgetting why you entered. Your working memory, your mental scratch pad, was wiped clean. When you perform mental math, such as "what is 42 plus 29, you are using your working memory. You hold the numbers likely in the phonological loop, visualize the carrying of the one, the visuospatial sketch pad, and use your central executive to manage the entire process. This system is the bottleneck of consciousness. The more effectively you can manage this limited workspace, the better you can chunk information, and the better you can direct your central executive to stay on task, the more clearly and efficiently you can think. We have now seen that this workbench of the mind is powerful, but it is also fragile and temporary. It is a save button, not a save file. If information is truly important, if we want to keep it for longer than 30 seconds, we cannot just keep rehearsing it forever. It must be moved from this temporary RAM to the permanent hard drive. This leads us to the most critical part of learning. How do we take a fleeting thought, a new fact, or a new experience, and make it last? Our next lesson covers this crucial process. We will explore how information is transferred from working memory and transformed into the vast, stable, and durable library of long-term memory. This is the process of encoding. Long-term memory, the encoding process. In our last lesson, we explored the active but profoundly temporary workbench of the mind, your working memory. We learned that it is a fragile and limited space, much like the RAM on a computer, holding information for only a few fleeting seconds unless we actively and continually rehearse it. But what if we want to keep that information? What if we want to store it for days, for weeks, for years, or for an entire lifetime? We cannot simply keep repeating a fact to ourselves forever. There must be a mechanism, a process, to move that information from the temporary workbench to the vast, permanent hard drive of the mind. This lesson is about that crucial, almost magical step. We will explore the process of encoding. This is the cognitive save command that transforms a fleeting thought, a passing experience, the fart and into a lasting, durable memory. This is the very foundation of all lasting learning. Let us begin. Let us start with a clear definition. Encoding is the cognitive process of transforming incoming information that is currently active in your working memory, into a format or a code that can be successfully and durably stored in your long-term memory. It is the first and most critical step in creating any new, stable memory. It is important to understand that this is a process of transformation, not just transfer. You are not just moving the memory, you are translating it. Let us return to our computer analogy. When you are working on a document, it exists in the computer's RAM. When you click the Save button, the computer does not just move that file. It translates your work, the letters, the formatting, the images, into a specific, complex file format, like a .doc or a .pdf file. It then writes that new code in the specialized magnetic language of the hard drive. Your brain does the same. Encoding is the process of taking the experience, the sounds, the sights, the abstract facts, and translating it into a stable, physical pattern of neural connections. This new, stable pattern is called a memory trace, or an engram. It is a physical change in the structure of your brain. We can also use the analogy of a meticulous librarian. When a new book, a new experience, arrives at the library, the librarian doesn't just toss it onto a random shelf. That would be like working memory. To encode it for the long term, the librarian must first process it. They read the title, they understand the subject. They assign it a specific catalogue number, and then they place it in the correct corresponding section of the library. This careful, initial processing, this act of assigning meaning and context, and a code, is the encoding. And the quality of that initial work determines whether the book can ever be found again. Poorly encoded memories, like books without a catalogue number, are as good as lost. A central discovery in cognitive psychology. And the most important part of this lesson is that not all encoding is created equal. The way you encode information, the manner in which you first process a new fact, has a profound impact on how strong that memory will be and how easily you will be able to retrieve it later. In 1972, two psychologists named Fergus Craik and Robert Lockhart proposed a revolutionary idea that we now call the levels of processing model. Their argument was simple. Memory is not just a box you put things in. Instead, memory is a byproduct of how you think about information. The deeper you process or think about a piece of information at the moment of encoding, the stronger, more durable, and more easily retrieved the memory will be. Let us walk through these levels. At the very bottom, we have shallow processing. This is encoding based on the superficial, physical, or perceptual features of a stimulus. For example, if you are shown a list of words and you are asked to remember the word elephant, shallow processing would be to simply notice, this word is written in all capital letters, or this word starts with the letter E, or this word rhymes with relevant. You are paying attention to the shape or the sound of the word, but you are not engaging with its meaning at all. This kind of encoding creates a very weak, very fragile memory trace. It is forgotten almost instantly. A step deeper, we might have intermediate, or phonemic, processing, where you are focusing on the sound of the word. But the most effective method, by far, is deep processing. This is also known as semantic encoding. Semantic simply means related to meaning. This is where you engage with the meaning and the concept of the information. For our word elephant, deep processing would be to think about what an elephant is. You picture a large, grey animal. You think about it living in Africa or India. You recall that it has a long trunk. You categorize it as a mammal. You are not just seeing the word, you are engaging with the concept. Craik and Lockhart's key insight was that this deep semantic processing forces you to do something called elaboration. Elaboration is the active, effortful process of linking this new piece of information to the knowledge that you already possess. You are connecting the new fact to your vast existing web of memories. When you thought about the elephant, you linked it to your existing animal category, your Africa file, your mammal concept. This is like our librarian, not just putting the new book on the science shelf, but cross-referencing it in the card catalogue with biology, zoology, and evolution. The more connections you build at the moment of encoding, the more hooks you create, the more retrieval paths you are building for later. This deep, elaborate encoding is what creates a rich, strong, and truly durable memory. This levels of processing framework is not just an abstract theory. It is the most practical and powerful advice one can give for effective, real-world learning. It explains, with perfect clarity, why some study habits are incredibly effective and why others are a complete waste of time. Let's consider the most common study technique, rereading a textbook chapter, or passively highlighting sentences. When you are just rereading text, especially for the second or third time, your brain very quickly becomes familiar with the words on the page. You are doing shallow processing. You see the shapes of the letters, you recognize the words, and your brain says, "Yes, I've seen this before." This creates what psychologists call a fluency illusion. It feels like you are learning because the text feels familiar, but you are not processing the meaning. You are just recognizing the text. Now, let's compare that to a different technique. Instead of rereading, you read the chapter once, you close the book, and you try to explain the main concept to a friend, or just to an empty chair, in your own words. To do this, you cannot rely on shallow recognition. You are forced to retrieve the concept, to engage with its meaning. This is deep processing. And you are forced to link it to other things you know to form a coherent explanation. This is elaboration. This single act of effortful retrieval and explanation, this one act of deep semantic encoding, will create a memory trace that is 10 times stronger, 10 times more durable than an hour of passive, shallow rereading. This is why the best learners are not those who just absorb information, but those who interact with it. They ask questions. How does this relate to what I already know? They make connections. This is just like. They try to teach it to others. They are, in essence, deep processors by nature. So, we have now followed the journey. Information is selected by the spotlight of attention. It is held and manipulated in the workbench of working memory. And now, through the profound process of deep, meaningful encoding, it has been transformed, translated, and saved for the long term. We have clicked Save. We have given the new book to our meticulous librarian, who has catalogued it and given it meaning. This leads us to the next logical question. Where exactly does it go? What does this vast, permanent hard drive, this long-term memory, actually look like? Is it just one giant, disorganized folder? Or is it a highly organized, complex library with different rooms and different wings for different kinds of knowledge? Our next lesson will explore that library. We will open the doors to the vast storage systems of long-term memory and discover the different file cabinets the mind uses to store your facts, your skills, and your entire personal life story. Long-term memory, storage systems. In our previous lesson, we explored the vital process of encoding. We learned how a new piece of information, a new fact, or a new experience must be deeply processed, given meaning, and actively linked to our existing knowledge to be saved effectively. We have followed the journey of a memory, from a fleeting sensation through the spotlight of attention onto the workbench of working memory, and finally, through the save command of encoding, it has been prepared for permanent storage. This brings us to our next fundamental question. Where does it go? What does this vast, permanent hard drive of the mind, this system we call long-term memory, actually look like? Is it just one enormous, disorganized warehouse, a single, giant box where we toss every fact, every skill, and every personal experience? The answer, our cognitive science team has discovered, is a definitive no. The library of your mind is a vast, sophisticated, and highly organized place. It is not one room, but a massive building with many different wings, different sections, and different file cabinets, each designed to store a specific kind of knowledge. In this lesson, we will take a calm, guided tour of this library. We will explore the different storage systems of your long-term memory. Let us begin with the main entrance. At the highest level, the library of long-term memory is divided into two fundamentally different main wings. The first wing is called explicit memory. This is also known as declarative memory. The word explicit means clear or intentionally stated. This is your memory with conscious awareness. It is the information you know, and that you can declare or tell to someone. This is your knowing what memory. It is the memory for facts, for concepts, and for personal events. When you consciously try to remember something, you are accessing this wing of the library. The second, and entirely separate, wing is called implicit memory. This is also known as non-declarative memory. The word implicit means suggested or unspoken. This is your memory without conscious awareness. It is the knowledge you don't know you know. Knowledge that you cannot easily declare or explain in words. Instead, it expresses itself through your actions, your behaviors, and your feelings. This is your knowing how memory. Let that primary distinction settle in. The conscious, knowing what, explicit, and the unconscious, knowing how, implicit. These two systems are processed and stored in different parts of the brain, and, as we will see, they can be separated. Now, let us explore these two wings in more detail. We will begin our tour in the first wing, the conscious, explicit memory system. As we walk in, we find that this wing is itself divided into two very special, organized sections. The first section is your episodic memory. Think of this as your personal, mental autobiography. The word episode gives you the key. This file system stores the episodes of your life. It is your memory of personal experiences, tied to a specific time, a specific place, and the emotions you felt. Your memory of what you ate for breakfast this morning, that is an episodic memory. Your memory of your 10th birthday party, your first day of school, the conversation you had with a friend last week. These are all episodes stored in this system. It is a mental time travel machine, allowing your conscious mind to journey back and re-experience your own past. This system is heavily reliant on that structure we met earlier, the hippocampus, which acts as the index or catalogue for these life events. The second section, in this wing, right next to the first, is your semantic memory. The word semantic means related to meaning. This is your general knowledge of the world. It is your vast internal encyclopedia, or Wikipedia, of facts, concepts, definitions, and categories. Your knowledge that Paris is the capital of France. Your understanding of what a dog is. Your ability to name the colors of the rainbow. Your knowledge of the very facts you are learning in this lesson. This is all semantic memory. Notice the key difference. Your episodic memory is personal. I remember when I learned that Paris is the capital of France, but your semantic memory is the general, impersonal fact itself. Paris is the capital of France. The context, the episode of learning it, has been stripped away, leaving only the pure, crystallized fact. Now, let us leave the wing of conscious memory and walk across the hall to that other, more mysterious wing, the unconscious implicit memory system. This wing feels different. There are no books, no facts. This is the workshop of the library. The largest room here is for procedural memory. This is the knowing how system. It is the storage for your complex motor skills, your habits, and your learned procedures. Think of riding a bicycle. When you first learned, you were using your explicit memory. Okay, I must, semantic, put my feet on the pedals, and I remember, episodic, my parent telling me to keep my balance. It was slow, conscious, and difficult. But after practice, that skill became procedural. It became implicit. Now, you can ride a bike without any conscious thought about balance or pedaling. Your body just knows what to do. The memory is stored in a different part of the brain entirely, in the cerebellum and basal ganglia. You cannot easily declare how you ride a bike. You can't explain the precise physics of your balance in words. You simply show it. This is procedural memory. The same goes for typing on a keyboard. playing a musical instrument, or the simple habit of tying your shoes. It is memory expressed as skilled action. The most powerful proof that these memory systems are truly separate, that this library really does have two different wings, comes from one of the most important people in the history of neuroscience, the patient H.M., whose real name was Henry Molaison. In 1953, to treat severe epilepsy, H.M. underwent a radical surgery that removed large parts of his medial temporal lobes, including, crucially, both of his hippocampi. The surgery was a tragic success. It cured his epilepsy, but it left him with a profound condition. From that day forward, H.M. lost the ability to form any new explicit memories. His save button for new episodic and semantic knowledge was completely broken. He could remember his childhood, his old explicit memories were intact, but he could not remember what he had for lunch, or the name of a nurse he had met just 5 minutes prior. If you met him, had a long conversation, and then left the room, when you returned, it would be the first time he had ever met you. He was, in a sense, permanently stuck in 1953, unable to create a new page in his autobiography. But here is the discovery that changed everything. Scientists found that his implicit memory was perfectly fine. They gave him a procedural task, to trace a star shape while looking only at his hand in a mirror. This is a very difficult skill to learn. On day 1, like anyone, H.M. was terrible at it. When he returned, on day 2, he had no explicit, episodic memory of ever having seen the task or the researchers before. He claimed it was his first time, and yet, when he picked up the pencil, his procedural memory kicked in. He was significantly better at the task than he was on day 1. On day 3, he was better still. His knowing how system was learning and storing the new skill, even as his knowing what system had no conscious record that the learning had ever taken place. H.M.'s case proved, beyond all doubt, that you can destroy one wing of the library, the explicit, while leaving the other, the implicit, completely intact. This is why, as you go about your life, you are using all these systems in parallel. You have the semantic knowledge of the rules of the road, the episodic memory of the day you passed your driving test, and the procedural memory that allows your hands and feet to drive the car automatically, freeing your conscious explicit mind to think about something else entirely. We have now toured the Great Library. We have seen its vast, separate wings for our personal stories, our facts about the world, and our deep bodily skills. We understand how information is encoded, and we understand where it is stored. But, as anyone who has ever misplaced their keys knows, having something in storage is not the same as being able to find it. A library is useless. A hard drive is useless if you cannot access the files. Having a memory is one thing, being able to use it is another. Our next lesson moves to the third and final stage of the memory process. We must now explore the act of retrieval, the process of finding and pulling information out of this vast storage, and we must explore its frustrating and all too human counterpart, the process of forgetting. Long-term memory, retrieval, and forgetting. In our lessons so far, we have followed the complete journey of a new memory. We have seen how it is first selected by the spotlight of attention, held on the workbench of working memory, transformed by the deep, meaningful save command of encoding, and finally, filed away into the vast, organized library of long-term memory, in its proper wing for facts, events, or skills. But our journey is not yet complete. A library, no matter how vast or well organized, is useless if you cannot find the book you are looking for. A hard drive is just a heavy box if you cannot open the files. Having a memory stored and being able to access that memory are two very different things. This lesson explores the third and final stage of the memory process, retrieval. This is the act of finding and pulling information out of storage, and, as we all know, this process is not always perfect. We will also, therefore, explore its frustrating and all too human counterpart, the natural process of forgetting. Let us begin with a clear definition. Retrieval is the cognitive process of accessing information that has been successfully encoded and stored in your long-term memory, and bringing it back into your conscious awareness, back onto the workbench of your working memory. If encoding is the librarian cataloging and shelving a new book, retrieval is you finding that book's reference in the card catalog, walking to the correct shelf and pulling it out to read. Crucially, this process almost never happens in a vacuum. We do not just find memories at random. Retrieval is an active, reconstructive process, and it is heavily dependent on retrieval cues. A retrieval cue is any hint, any trigger, any piece of information in your current environment or in your current thoughts that helps you find the specific memory you are looking for. It is the card catalog number for your memory. A retrieval cue can be anything: a smell, a location, a song, a word, or even a feeling, that familiar scent of baking, which suddenly and unexpectedly brings back a vivid memory of your grandmother's kitchen. That scent is a powerful retrieval cue. This brings us to forgetting. What is forgetting? Forgetting is simply the inability to retrieve information that was once stored. The most important thing to understand, the key insight from cognitive science, is that forgetting is most often a failure of retrieval, not a failure of storage. In most cases, the memory is not gone, the book is not destroyed, the file is not deleted. Rather, we have simply lost the card catalog number, the retrieval path is blocked, or the right cue is missing. The book is still on the shelf, but we just cannot find it. This is a very hopeful way to think about forgetting. It means that with the right cue, the lost memory can often be found. Let's dive deeper into these retrieval cues. The power of cues reveals just how interconnected our memories are. One well-known phenomenon is context-dependent memory. This is the finding that it is easier to retrieve a memory when you are in the same physical environment where you first encoded that memory. The sights, sounds, and smells of that location all act as powerful built-in retrieval cues. This is why, if you return to your old school or a childhood home, you are suddenly flooded with memories you hadn't thought about in years. The context itself is triggering the retrieval. A similar idea is state-dependent memory. This is the finding that your internal, physiological, or psychological state also gets encoded with a memory. If you learn a list of words while you are feeling very happy, you will likely remember them better later on if you are also in a happy mood. Your mood is the retrieval cue. Now, let's turn to the other side, forgetting. Why do our retrieval attempts fail? The oldest theory is called decay theory. This is the intuitive idea that memories, like old photographs, simply fade and crumble over time. If a memory trace, the physical engram in the brain, is not used, it weakens and disappears. The pioneer of memory research, a German psychologist named Hermann Ebbinghaus, famously tested this on himself in the 1,880 seconds. He memorized long lists of nonsense syllables and then meticulously tracked how much he forgot over time. He plotted his results on a graph that is now one of the most famous in psychology, the forgetting curve. This curve shows that we tend to forget an enormous amount of new information very, very rapidly, perhaps more than half within the first day, and then the rate of forgetting slows down and what's left becomes more stable. While decay certainly plays a part, most scientists today believe it is not the main reason we forget. A much more powerful explanation is interference theory. This theory argues that we forget not because memories decay, but because other memories get in the way. The library has become too crowded, and the books are blocking each other. There are two primary types of interference. The first is proactive interference. The pro means forward acting. This is when old information blocks your ability to remember new information. A perfect everyday example is when you get a new phone number or a new password. For the next few days, you keep remembering your old number, your old password. Your old, well-learned memory is interfering forward and preventing the retrieval of the new one. The second type is retroactive interference. The retro means backward acting. This is the exact opposite. This is when new information causes you to forget old information. For example, once you finally learn that new phone number, you may find it almost impossible to remember your old one. The new memory has interfered backward, blocking the retrieval path to the old one. Finally, there is the simplest form of forgetting, which we've already touched upon, cue-dependent forgetting. The memory is not lost, it's not blocked. It's just temporarily inaccessible because you don't have the right cue. This is the infuriating universal experience known as the tip of the tongue phenomenon. This is when you know a word or an actor's name. You can feel it right there. You might even know what letter it starts with, but you cannot retrieve the word itself. The memory is clearly in storage, but the retrieval mechanism has failed. These processes are at work every moment, that tip of the tongue feeling, and the relief you feel when, 2 hours later, the name randomly pops into your head. That is the perfect example of retrieval. What happened? You simply stumbled upon the right retrieval cue, and the lost memory was instantly found. This understanding of retrieval and forgetting has profound implications for how we should learn. It tells us why cramming, studying for 8 hours straight before an exam, is so ineffective. First, it creates massive retroactive interference, as new information from hour 8 blocks the memory of information from hour 1. Second, it relies on a single context, meaning you have very few retrieval cues. The forgetting curve shows us the solution. The best way to build a durable memory is to fight that initial, steep drop. The way to do that is spaced repetition. You review the information at gradually increasing intervals, just as it's beginning to fade. Each time you do this, you are strengthening the retrieval path and flattening the forgetting curve. Furthermore, the best way to study is not just to reread, but to practice retrieving. This is called retrieval practice, or the testing effect. Every time you force your brain to find the book in the library without looking at your notes, you are making that retrieval path stronger, faster, and more reliable. And perhaps it is comforting to know that forgetting is not just a bug, it is an essential, adaptive feature of your mind. You need to forget where you parked your car 3 weeks ago, so that you can remember where you parked it today. Your mind is, in its own way, intelligently tidying up, making it easier to retrieve the memories that are relevant, and letting the old, unused, and interfering ones fade into the background. We have now completed our full 3-part module on human memory. We have journeyed from the raw data of sensation through the encoding save command into the vast, organized storage systems of the library. And now, we have explored the final act of retrieval and its shadow, forgetting. We understand how we store and recall facts and events. This brings us to our next major topic, a topic that is deeply related but distinct. This is the process of learning. Memory is the storage of information. Learning is the acquisition of that information, or the acquisition of new skills, new behaviors, and new associations. How does your mind learn in the first place that a bell means food, or that crying leads to comfort, or that practice leads to skill? We will begin our new module with the most fundamental, most foundational form of learning, a simple, powerful process of learning by association. This is the subject of our next lesson: classical conditioning, foundational learning, classical conditioning. We have now completed our comprehensive module on human memory. We have followed the journey of a fact or an event from its encoding in the workshop of working memory to its storage in the vast library of long-term memory, and finally to its retrieval back into our conscious awareness. We have explored how our minds store information. We now begin our next major module. In this new chapter, we will explore the process of learning. Learning is a deeply related but distinct process. Learning is how we acquire new information in the first place. More broadly, learning is defined as any relatively permanent change in our behavior or our knowledge, a change that results from experience. How does your mind build its first, most basic connections about the world? How do you learn to predict your environment? We will begin this module with the most fundamental, most foundational form of learning. It is a simple, powerful, and often completely unconscious process: the process of learning by association. This lesson is on the nature of classical conditioning. Let us begin with a clear definition. Classical conditioning is a learning process, a simple form of learning, where a living organism learns to associate two different stimuli that were previously unrelated. Specifically, it is a process where a neutral stimulus, something that originally means nothing, comes to trigger an automatic, involuntary response, after it is repeatedly paired with a different stimulus that naturally triggers that response. The learning is not a conscious decision. The learning is in the association. The brain, without your conscious effort, simply learns to connect event A with event B, and begins to react to event A as if it were event B. To understand this, we must first learn the 5 essential ingredients of this process. First, we have the unconditioned stimulus, or UCS. The word unconditioned simply means unlearned or natural. This is a stimulus that automatically, without any learning, triggers a response. A perfect example is the food you eat. You do not need to learn to react to food. Second, we have the unconditioned response, or UCR. This is the unlearned, natural, reflexive response to that unconditioned stimulus. The response to the food, the UCS, is salivation, the UCR. It is a reflex. Food in the mouth causes salivation. Third, we have the neutral stimulus, or NS. This is a stimulus that, at first, means nothing. It produces no specific response. Imagine the sound of a simple, clear bell. The first time you hear it, it is just a sound. It is neutral. Now comes the learning. The learning happens during the pairing, or acquisition, phase. We present the neutral stimulus, the bell, and then, immediately afterward, we present the unconditioned stimulus, the food. The bell rings, then the food appears. The bell rings, then the food appears. We repeat this pairing over and over again. What happens? The brain begins to build an association. It learns to predict that the bell means food is coming. Because of this pairing, the neutral stimulus, the bell, is no longer neutral. It has acquired meaning. It now becomes the conditioned stimulus, or CS. The word conditioned simply means learned. The bell is now a learned trigger. And what is the result? Now, when the dog hears the bell, the CS, even if no food is present, it will begin to salivate. This salivation, this learned, new response to the formerly neutral bell, is called the conditioned response, or CR. Notice, the behavior is the same, salivation, but the trigger is different. The unconditioned response was salivation to food. The conditioned response is salivation to a bell. This is the essence of classical conditioning. A new, learned association has been formed. This entire process was discovered, almost by accident, by a Russian physiologist named Ivan Pavlov around the turn of the 20th century. Pavlov was not a psychologist. He was a digestive scientist. He won a Nobel Prize for his research on the digestive systems of dogs. As part of his research, he was surgically diverting the dog's salivary glands to measure, precisely, how much saliva they produced when they were given food. But he noticed a strange problem, a problem that frustrated him. His dogs, he observed, would often start salivating before any food was presented. They would salivate at the sight of the lab assistant who fed them, or at the sound of the assistant's footsteps approaching down the hall. Pavlov realized he had stumbled upon a fundamental, objective, and measurable form of learning, a psychic reflex, as he first called it. He set aside his digestive research and spent the rest of his career studying this phenomenon. His experiments were simple and elegant. He would place a dog in a harness. He would sound a neutral stimulus, a bell, or a metronome. And then he would present the unconditioned stimulus, meat, powder. The dogs learned the association. The sound of the metronome, the new CS, was enough to cause the dogs to salivate, the CR. Pavlov, being a meticulous scientist, also discovered several other key processes. He discovered extinction. This is what happens when you stop the pairing. If you ring the bell, the CS over and A over, but you stop bringing the food, the UCS. The association will weaken. The dog will salivate less and less until, finally, it stops responding to the bell. The conditioned response has been extinguished. But then, he discovered spontaneous recovery. After he had extinguished the response, he would let the dog rest for a few hours. Then, he would return and ring the bell just one more time, and suddenly, the dog's salivation, the CR, would reappear, all on its own. It was weaker than before, but it was back. This proved the association was not erased, it was merely suppressed. He also documented generalization. This is the tendency, once a response has been conditioned, for stimuli that are similar to the conditioned stimulus to trigger the same response. For example, a dog conditioned to salivate to a bell of a specific pitch might also salivate to a bell of a slightly higher or slightly lower pitch. And finally, he found discrimination. This is the learned ability to distinguish between the true conditioned stimulus and other, similar but irrelevant stimuli. He could teach the dogs that only the specific bell predicted food, and that the other similar sounds meant nothing. The dogs learned to tell the difference, to discriminate. This is not just about dogs and bells. This simple foundational process is at the very core of our own human, involuntary, and emotional lives. The most famous and controversial example of human classical conditioning was an experiment conducted in 1920 by John B. Watson, the founder of behaviorism. In the Little Albert experiment, Watson presented a 9-month-old baby, Albert, with a harmless, neutral stimulus, a white, fluffy rat. At first, Albert was curious and had no fear. But then, Watson began the pairing. As Albert reached for the rat, the NS, Watson would strike a steel bar with a hammer just behind the baby's head, creating a sudden, terrifyingly loud noise, the UCS. Naturally, the baby would cry and show fear, the UCR. After just a few pairings, the rat was no longer neutral. The mere sight of the white rat, now the CS, was enough to make little Albert cry and crawl away in terror, the CR. He had learned to fear the rat. Even more, his fear generalized. He was soon afraid of other, similar objects. A white rabbit, a fur coat, even a Santa Claus mask. This experiment, though considered highly unethical today, provided a powerful model for how human phobias might be learned. But it is not all negative. Classical conditioning explains many of our positive emotions. Why does a specific, old song, when you hear it, suddenly make you feel warm and happy and nostalgic? That song, at some point in your past, was a neutral stimulus, but it was paired, perhaps at a wonderful party or during a first romance, with a naturally positive, happy event, the UCS. Now, years later, the song itself, the CS, is enough to trigger that same conditioned happy feeling, the CR. It also explains many of our tastes and our aversions. Imagine you eat a new, unusual food, say, sushi, a neutral stimulus, for the first time. Hours later, by pure coincidence, you come down with a terrible stomach flu, an unconditioned stimulus, and become very ill, an unconditioned response. Your brain, in a single, powerful trial, will build an association, and now the very thought or smell of sushi, the conditioned stimulus, might make you feel nauseous, a conditioned response. This is a conditioned taste aversion, a survival mechanism, and it is pure classical conditioning. We have now seen the power of classical conditioning. It is a fundamental process that explains how we, and other animals, learn to associate events and predict the future. It is a process of learning to react to the world. But it has its limits. It explains our involuntary, our reflexive, our automatic responses. It explains salivation, fear, and feelings of happiness. It does not, however, explain how we learn new voluntary behaviors. It doesn't explain how we learn to operate on our world to get a result. How do we learn to ride a bicycle, to study for an exam, to press a lever, or to work hard for a paycheck? These are not reflexes. These are choices, actions, operations. To understand this different, active kind of learning, we must explore how our behaviors are shaped, not by the associations that come before them, but by the consequences that come after them. This brings us to our next lesson, the study of operant conditioning. Learning from consequences, operant conditioning. In our last lesson, we explored the world of classical conditioning. We learned how our minds and the minds of animals build profound, automatic associations. How a neutral stimulus, like a bell, can come to predict an event and trigger an involuntary reflexive response, like salivation or a jolt of fear. That form of learning, however, is passive. It explains how we learn to react to the world. But we do not just react to the world, we act upon it. We operate in our environment. We make voluntary choices. We perform actions. We learn to ride a bicycle. We learn to study for an exam. We learn to go to work each day. These are not reflexes. These are behaviors we choose to do to get a result. How do we learn these new voluntary behaviors? This lesson explores that second, powerful form of learning. We will examine how the consequences of our actions, the rewards and punishments that follow our choices, systematically shape our future behavior. This is the study of operant conditioning. Let us begin with our definition. Operant conditioning is a method of learning, a learning process. That occurs through rewards and punishments for voluntary behavior. The word operant is the key. It was chosen to suggest that the learner is an operator, actively operating on the environment to produce a consequence. The core idea of operant conditioning is beautifully, and perhaps deceptively, simple. It is an idea you already know instinctively. Behaviors that are followed by a positive or desirable consequence are strengthened and are more likely to be repeated in the future. And, conversely, behaviors that are followed by a negative or undesirable consequence are weakened and are less likely to be repeated in the future. While classical conditioning is about learning associations between stimuli, operant conditioning is about learning associations between a behavior and its consequence. The organism learns. When I do this, that happens. This simple feedback loop, action, then consequence, then change in future action, is the engine that shapes an enormous range of our voluntary lives. The key figure in the history of operant conditioning. The scientist who built an entire field of psychology on this single idea was B.F. Skinner. Skinner was a behaviorist, following in the tradition of John B. Watson. He believed that to truly be a science, psychology must focus only on what is observable and measurable. And to him, that meant observing behavior and the environmental consequences that shaped it. To study this principle, he designed a famous piece of laboratory equipment that is now known as a Skinner box, or more formally, an operant chamber. This was a simple, enclosed box, containing, perhaps, a small lever, or a button, and a mechanism to deliver a food pellet. A rat, or a pigeon, would be placed inside. At first, it would explore randomly. By chance, it might accidentally bump or press the lever. When it did, click, a food pellet, a reward, would appear. The animal would eat the pellet and continue exploring. Soon, it would press the lever again. Click, another pellet. Very quickly, the animal learned the association. It learned that its voluntary action, pressing the lever, caused a desirable consequence, getting food. As a result, its rate of pressing the lever would increase dramatically. It had learned a new operant behavior. From these simple, elegant experiments, Skinner defined the precise tools that the environment uses to shape our behavior. These tools fall into two main categories: reinforcement and punishment. Let us explore these, one by one, very clearly. First, and most important, is reinforcement. A reinforcer is any consequence that strengthens a behavior or increases the likelihood that it will happen again. Reinforcement always builds up behavior. But there are two different ways to reinforce a behavior. The first is positive reinforcement. In operant conditioning, the word positive does not mean good. It means to add something, like the plus sign in mathematics. So, positive reinforcement is when you add a desirable or rewarding stimulus to increase a behavior. This is the most intuitive. The rat presses the lever, and you add food. A child cleans their room, and you add praise, or an allowance. You go to work, and you add a paycheck. The added reward makes the behavior, working, cleaning, more likely to happen again. The second type, and this is the one that is most often misunderstood, is negative reinforcement. Again, negative does not mean bad. It means to subtract or remove something, like the minus sign. So, negative reinforcement is when you increase a behavior by removing an undesirable or aversive stimulus. The behavior stops or avoids something bad. Here is the classic example. Imagine an annoying, high-pitched beeping sound starts in your car. It will only stop when you put on your seatbelt. The beeping is the undesirable, aversive stimulus. The behavior is buckling your seatbelt. Because that behavior removes the annoying sound, it is negatively reinforced. You will be more likely to buckle up in the future. To avoid the sound? Another example, you have a headache, an aversive stimulus. You take a painkiller, the behavior. The headache goes away, the stimulus is removed. You are negatively reinforced for taking the painkiller and are more likely to do so the next time you have a headache. Both positive and negative reinforcement increase behavior. One adds a good thing, the other removes a bad thing. Now, let us look at the other category, punishment. A punisher is any consequence that weakens a behavior or decreases the likelihood that it will happen again. Punishment always suppresses behavior. And just like reinforcement, punishment comes in two forms. First, positive punishment. Again, positive means to add. So, positive punishment is when you add an undesirable or aversive stimulus. to decrease a behavior. For example, a driver speeds, and a police officer adds a speeding ticket and a fine. A child misbehaves, and a parent adds a scolding or extra chores. You are adding something bad to make the behavior, speeding, misbehaving, less likely to happen again. Second, negative punishment. Negative means to remove. So, negative punishment is when you remove a desirable or pleasant stimulus to decrease a behavior. For example, a teenager breaks their curfew, and the parent removes their phone privileges for a week. A child hits their sibling and is placed in timeout, removing them from the desirable stimulus of playing and social interaction. You are taking away something good to make the behavior, breaking curfew, hitting, less likely to happen again. These four forces, positive and negative reinforcement, positive and negative punishment, are operating on you and shaping your voluntary behavior every single day. When you find that a certain study technique, the behavior, gets you a good grade, positive reinforcement, you are more likely to use that technique again. When you find that leaving early for work, the behavior, allows you to avoid heavy traffic, negative reinforcement, you are more likely to leave early again. These principles are the absolute foundation of animal training. When you train a dog, you are not scolding it, you are using positive reinforcement. You wait for the desired behavior, a sit, and the moment it happens, you mark it with a click or a yes, and you add a powerful reward, like a treat. You are strengthening the sit behavior. The entire industry of video game design is a masterclass in operant conditioning, specifically what Skinner called schedules of reinforcement. Games are built to provide a compelling, intermittent, and rewarding feedback loop, giving you points, positive reinforcement, or removing an enemy, negative reinforcement, all to keep you engaged in the behavior of playing. It is a powerful, and sometimes morally complex, a driver of human society. It shapes how we raise our children, how we manage our workplaces, and how our legal systems are designed. We have now seen two of the great pillars of learning. We have seen classical conditioning, where we learn involuntary associations, learning to predict our world. And we have now seen operant conditioning, where we learn from the direct consequences of our voluntary actions, learning to operate on our world. But is this all there is? Is all learning a matter of direct personal experience? Do you, for example, have to personally touch a hot stove to learn that it will burn you? Do you have to personally get a speeding ticket to learn that you should not speed? No, of course not. We are social creatures, surrounded by other people. We have a third and uniquely powerful way to learn, not from our own experiences, but from theirs. We can learn simply by watching. Our next lesson will explore this profound social form of learning, the power of observational learning, cognitive and observational learning. In our journey through the science of learning, we have so far explored two of its great pillars. We began with classical conditioning, the passive, involuntary process of learning by association, how a bell can come to mean food, or how a song can come to hold a feeling of joy. Then, we explored operant conditioning, the active, voluntary process of learning by direct consequence, how our own actions, when followed by rewards or punishments, are shaped and molded over time. Both of these processes are powerful, but they both rely entirely on your own direct experience. You are the one hearing the bell. You are the one pressing the lever. But is this the only way we learn? Must you personally touch a hot stove to learn that it will burn you? Must you personally experience the consequence of every possible action to navigate the world? No, of course not. We are, above all, social creatures. We are surrounded by others, by parents, by peers, by teachers, and by models of all kinds. We have a third, and perhaps most human, way to learn. A way to learn without direct experience. A way to learn simply by watching. This lesson explores this profound, efficient, and cognitive form of learning, the power of observational learning. Let us begin with our definition. Observational learning, which is also often called social learning, is the process of learning by watching the behaviors of others and by observing the consequences that those others receive. The other that we are watching is called a model. This model can be a parent, a friend, a teacher, a character in a movie, or even the words in a book. This form of learning is profoundly different from the two we have already covered. It is not an automatic reflexive pairing like classical conditioning, and it is not a direct trial and error process like operant conditioning. Instead, it is a deeply cognitive process. The word cognitive tells us that it involves the very mental processes we have discussed. It involves attention. You have to notice the model. It involves memory. You have to store what you saw. And it involves thinking. You have to judge whether the behavior is worth imitating. You are, in essence, letting other people do the trial and error for you, and you are learning from their successes and from their mistakes. The key figure in this field, the psychologist who truly brought thinking back into the science of learning, was Albert Bandura. In the 1960 seconds, psychology was dominated by B.F. Skinner's operant conditioning. The behaviorist view was that all learning was a result of direct reinforcement or punishment. But Bandura felt this was an incomplete picture. It left out the enormous power of social modeling. To prove this, he conducted one of the most famous and striking experiments in the history of psychology, the Bobo doll experiments. Here is the simple, elegant setup. Bandura had preschool children, one by one, sit in a room and play. In another part of the room, an adult model was also present with some toys, including a large, inflatable, weighted bottom doll called a Bobo doll. The children were divided into groups. One group of children watched the adult model behave aggressively toward the doll. The model did not just hit it. The model performed a series of novel, specific, and unusual aggressive acts. The model would punch the doll in the nose, hit it on the head with a toy mallet, kick it across the room, and shout specific phrases like "sock him in the nose" and "kick him." A second group of children watched an adult model who behaved non-aggressively, simply playing quietly with other toys and completely ignoring the Bobo doll. After this observation period, the child was taken to another room, a room filled with wonderful, attractive toys. But, after just 2 minutes, the experimenter would stop the child, saying these toys were reserved for the other children. This was a crucial step. The child was now in a state of mild frustration. Finally, the frustrated child was taken to a third room, a room that contained several toys, including a mallet and the very same Bobo doll. The child was then left alone and observed through a one-way mirror. The results were dramatic and, at the time, shocking. The children who had watched the non-aggressive model, or no model at all, rarely, if ever, showed any aggression toward the doll. But the children who had watched the aggressive model, they did something remarkable. They unleashed a torrent of aggression on the doll, and, most importantly, it was not just general aggression. They performed the exact same novel behaviors they had witnessed. They punched the doll in the nose. They picked up the mallet and hit the doll's head. They kicked it. And they were even heard repeating the specific phrases, like, "sock him in the nose." What did this prove? It proved, beyond any doubt, that learning can occur vicariously, without any direct, personal reinforcement. The children were never rewarded for hitting the doll. They were never punished. They learned a complex new multi-step behavior simply by watching. Bandura's work showed that there is a difference between learning a behavior and performing it. Every child in that first group had learned how to attack the doll. The behavior was stored in their memory. But Bandura took it one step further. He asked, what motivates the child to perform the behavior? In a later variation, children watched the model be either rewarded, praised, and given candy for their aggression, or punished, scolded sharply, and called a bully for their aggression. The results were exactly as you would predict. The children who saw the model get rewarded, a process Bandura called vicarious reinforcement, were far more likely to imitate the aggression. The children who saw the model get punished, vicarious punishment, were far less likely to imitate the aggression. This is the cognitive part. The child is thinking. The child observes, retains the information, and then makes a judgment. When that person did that, they got a reward. I should try that too. Or, when that person did that, they got in trouble. I will not do that. They are learning from the consequences of others. This form of learning, this social, observational, cognitive learning, is, perhaps, the primary engine of human culture. Think about it. This is how you learn to speak your native language, not by being reinforced for every single word, but by listening to and imitating the models all around you. This is how you learn the unwritten, complex rules of your society and your cultural norms. How do you know how to behave in a quiet library versus at a loud sporting event? How do you know the proper way to greet someone in your culture? You learned it by watching. This explains the profound power of role models. We are naturally, biologically, wired to imitate those we see as successful, prestigious, or similar to us. This is why the behavior of parents, older siblings, and peers is so incredibly formative. A parent who tells a child to be kind, but who models impatience and anger, is sending a conflicting message. And Bandura's work shows us that the child will, almost always, learn from the modeled behavior, not the spoken one. The old saying, "Do as I say, not as I do," is a complete failure from a psychological perspective. This research, as you can imagine, also ignited the decades-long and still ongoing debate about the effects of media. If a child will so readily imitate a live model hitting a doll, what do they learn from watching thousands of hours of charismatic heroes on television and in video games, who solve their problems through violence? Bandura's work suggests that this teaches the scripts for aggression, which are then stored in memory, waiting for a moment of frustration and a cue to be performed. From learning a new dance move on the internet to learning how to be a professional in a new job by watching your colleagues, observational learning is the quiet, constant, and powerful process that allows us to inherit the wisdom and the follies of those who came before us. We have now completed our module on learning. We have seen how our minds acquire new knowledge, new skills, and new behaviors. We've learned how we build associations with the world through classical conditioning, how our own actions are shaped by consequences through operant conditioning, and how we learn from the experience of others through observational learning. As a result of all this learning, our minds, our vast, long-term memory libraries, are now filled with a lifetime of stored information. We have skills, facts, episodes, and modeled behaviors. This leads us to our final and most complex module. What do we do with all of this information? How do we use it? How do we manipulate it to plan, to reason, to judge, and to create? We are now ready to begin our study of thinking. But before we can understand a complex process like solving a problem, we must first understand the basic units of thought. When you think, what are the mental materials you are working with? How does your mind organize the millions of facts you have learned into usable, efficient mental files? Our next lesson will explore these foundational file folders of the mind. We will begin our study of thinking by examining its fundamental building blocks, concepts, and categories. The building blocks of thought, concepts, and categories. Welcome to our final and most complex module. We have now completed our journeys through memory and through learning. We have explored, in detail, how your mind stores a lifetime of knowledge, skills, and personal experiences in the vast, organized library of long-term memory. And we have explored the powerful processes, conditioning, and observation by which your mind acquires that information from the world. As a result, your mind is now full. It is a rich, dense, and intricate tapestry of stored information. This leads us to our final, fundamental question. What do we do with all of it? How does the mind use this vast library of knowledge? How do we manipulate this information? To plan for the future, to reason about the present, to solve a problem, to make a decision, or to create something new. We are now ready to begin our study of thinking. But, just as we could not build a house without first understanding the bricks and lumber, we cannot understand complex thinking, like reasoning or problem solving, until we first understand its basic materials. We must first ask, how is all that learned information organized? If your memory is a library, how are the books arranged on the shelves? How does your mind create a system that is efficient and not just a chaotic warehouse of facts? This lesson explores the foundational file folders of the mind. We begin our study of thinking by examining its fundamental building blocks, concepts, and categories. When you look at the world, you are not seeing a confusing storm of unique, individual items. When you walk into a park, you do not see Object 1, a small, brown, furry thing, Object 2, a large, green, leafy thing, and Object 3, a flat, wooden thing with 4 legs. Instead, you instantly and automatically see a dog, a tree, and a bench. How do you do this? You do it by using concepts. A concept is a mental grouping, a mental file folder that you create to hold similar objects, events, ideas, or people. A concept is the abstract idea of dogness, or treeness, or benchness. A category is, for our purposes, the folder itself, the group that the concept creates, the process of placing a new item into one of these folders, the act of filing the new furry thing you see into your dog folder, is called categorization. This is, perhaps, the most fundamental organizational process of your mind. It is your brain's primary strategy for making the world efficient and predictable. Think of it this way. Your mind has a vast mental filing system. It has a file folder for chair, it has one for bird, it has one for book, but it also has folders for much more abstract concepts, like justice, friendship, or game. This system is profoundly efficient. By creating these concepts, you do not need to learn, from scratch, what to do with every single new object you encounter. When you see a new, unfamiliar chair, one you have never seen before, you do not have to spend time analyzing it. Your mind instantly retrieves the chair file and all the knowledge stored within it. This is for sitting. It is stable. It will hold my weight. You know what it is and what to do with it in a fraction of a second. So, this is the what. But how does the mind do this? How does it decide what goes in the bird folder? For a long time, philosophers and psychologists believed we used a system of rigid rules, like a dictionary definition. A bird, they thought, must be an animal that has feathers and has wings and flies. But this system breaks down very quickly. What about a penguin? It has feathers and wings, but it does not fly. What about an ostrich, or a baby chick that has not yet grown its main feathers? Are they not birds? If our concepts were based on strict, rigid rules, our system would be slow, brittle, and often wrong. In the 1970 seconds, a cognitive psychologist named Eleanor Roche proposed a much more powerful and flexible idea. She argued that we do not use rigid rules. Instead, we form our concepts around a prototype. A prototype is the best example, or the most typical, or the average representation of that category. It is the image that comes to your mind when you hear the word. If I say, bird, you do not picture a penguin or an ostrich. You almost certainly picture a small feathered creature like a robin or a sparrow. That robin is your prototype for the entire category of bird. It is the average bird, the center of the concept. Now, here is how the system works. When you encounter a new object, say a blue jay at your window, your mind does not check it against a list of rules. It simply and very quickly compares it to your robin prototype. It sees small, feathered, has wings, is flying. It is a very close match to my prototype. File it. It is a bird. And when you go to the zoo and you see a penguin, your mind does the same comparison. It thinks, well, it has feathers and wings, but it is large. It does not fly, and it swims. It is not a very close match to my prototype, but it is closer to the bird prototype than it is to your fish prototype or your mammal prototype. And so, your mind files it. Just, perhaps, a bit more slowly. In the bird category, it is a bird, but it is what we call an atypical member. This prototype model brilliantly explains why some things feel birdier than other things. A robin is a good bird. A penguin is a weird bird. This system is fast, it is flexible, and it accounts for the fuzzy boundaries of our real-world categories. It is how your mind builds a useful, rather than a perfect, map of the world. It is almost impossible to overstate the importance of this one simple cognitive process. Without concepts, without this ability to categorize, your entire mental life would be impossible. Your world would be, as the psychologist William James described the world of an infant, a blooming, buzzing confusion. Every single object, every single experience, it would be unique. The chair you sat in yesterday would be a completely separate, new object from the chair you see today. You would have no way to use your past experience. You would be cognitively paralyzed, forced to learn the entire world anew every single second. Concepts are what allow you to generalize. This is the key, because you have a dog concept, built from your prototype of, perhaps, a golden retriever. You can see a new, unfamiliar creature, say, a small, barking terrier, and you can instantly generalize your knowledge. You can predict its behavior. You can assume, this thing probably barks. It might chase a ball. It probably enjoys walks. And it is probably not a threat. You are using your past knowledge, stored in that dog file, to navigate a new situation and to make an instant, and usually correct, prediction about the future. This is the very essence of efficient thought. You do not need to solve the world from scratch. You solve it by very, very quickly filing your current experience into the correct folder and pulling out all the relevant, pre-stored knowledge. It is the foundation of inference, of judgment, and of all common sense. We have now seen how our minds build this incredible, efficient, and vital filing system. We have these mental folders, these concepts, that allow us to organize and generalize our knowledge. But we now have a new problem. How do we handle these concepts? How do we share them with other people? If I want to talk to you about my dog concept or my justice concept, how do I get that abstract idea, that file folder, out of my head and into yours? And even inside my own head, how do I think about these concepts with any precision? How do I combine them? Dog and chair. To think the new thought, the dog is on the chair, I need a label, I need a symbol, I need a token, a name that represents the entire complex file folder. I need a system of symbols and the rules for combining them that allows me to label, manipulate, and communicate my concepts. This brings us to the most powerful tool for thinking that humanity has ever developed. Our next lesson explores this symbolic system, the relationship between language and thought. Language and thought. In our last lesson, we explored the mind's brilliant filing system. We learned how we create concepts or mental folders to organize the entire complex world, and how we use prototypes, or best examples, to quickly and efficiently file new experiences. We now have this vast internal library of organized knowledge. But this raises a new critical problem. How do we handle these concepts? How do we share them? If I want to communicate my complex concept of justice, or even my simple concept of dog, how do I get that abstract internal file folder out of my mind and into yours? And even within our own minds, how do we manipulate these concepts with precision? How do we combine the concept of dog, the concept of chair, and the concept of on to form the brand new, specific thought? The dog is on the chair. We need a system of labels. We need a set of agreed upon symbols or tokens that represent our concepts. And we need a set of rules for how to combine those symbols in a meaningful way. This lesson explores the most powerful, most complex, and most uniquely human tool for thinking. We will explore the intricate, two-way relationship between language and thought. Let us begin with a clear definition. Language is a system. It is a formal and shared system of symbols and the rules for combining them. The symbols can be spoken, words, written, characters, or the gestures of sign language. The word dog is just a sound, a symbol, that we, as English speakers, have all agreed represents the concept of that four-legged barking mammal. The rules are what we call grammar and syntax. These are the rules that govern how we combine the symbols. Grammar is why the dog is on the chair has a clear and instant meaning, while chair on dog the is just a jumble of labels. The rules allow us to convey complex relationships between our concepts. Language has two primary functions. The first is the most obvious, communication. It allows us to externalize our internal thoughts, to share our concepts, our ideas, our feelings, and our plans with other minds. But the second function is just as important and is central to our lesson. Language is also a primary tool for thinking. We use these labels, these words, inside our own heads. We form an inner monologue. We use language to reason, to plan, to reflect, and to manipulate ideas. It is the software we run on our hardware to manage our own concepts. It is, in a very real sense, the scaffolding for higher-level thought. This intimate, two-way relationship between the language we speak and the way we think leads to one of the deepest and most fascinating questions in all of cognitive science. Does the language you speak determine what you can think, or does it just influence what you think? This is the core of what is known as the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. This hypothesis is also called the theory of linguistic relativity. Let us explore this idea carefully. The hypothesis has two versions, a strong one and a weak one. The strong version is called linguistic determinism. This is the radical idea that the structure of your language limits and determines the very boundaries of your thought. If your language does not have a word for a specific concept, then, according to this strong view, you are incapable of thinking that concept. Thought is imprisoned by language. This strong version, linguistic determinism, is now mostly rejected by cognitive scientists. Why? Because we have ample evidence that we can think outside of our specific words. For one, we can all understand concepts for which we have no single word. For example, the specific, bittersweet feeling of returning to a place you once loved, only to find it changed and unfamiliar. We have no single word for that, but you just understood the concept perfectly. Furthermore, if language determined thought, we could never invent new words, but we do it all the time. The words internet, smartphone, and podcast did not exist a few decades ago. We had the new concepts first, and then we created the labels for them. This proves that thought can, and does, exist before language. This brings us to the weak version of the hypothesis, linguistic relativity. This is the idea that language does not determine thought, but it influences it. It shapes it. It makes certain ways of thinking easier or more habitual than others. This weaker version, linguistic relativity, is widely accepted and supported by fascinating research. Let me share a few classic examples. Let's start with color perception. In English, we have one basic word, blue. If we want to describe a lighter or darker shade, we have to add an adjective, light blue or dark blue. In Russian, however, they have two completely separate basic words. Goluboy refers only to light blue, and siny refers only to dark blue. They are as different as red and pink are to us. Studies have shown that native Russian speakers, because their language forces them to make this distinction, are actually a fraction of a second faster at perceiving and distinguishing between these two shades of blue than English speakers are. Their language has tuned their perception. Or, consider spatial awareness. In English, we almost always describe space in relation to our own bodies. This is egocentric. We say, the cup is to my left, or move the chair forward, but there are some languages, such as Gugu Yimithir, spoken by an Aboriginal Australian group, that have no words for left, right, front, or back. Instead, they only use the cardinal directions north, south, east, west. This is allocentric. They would say, the cup is to the west of you, or there is a fly on your south leg. Think about what this means. To speak this language, you must be, at every single moment of your life, aware of your exact orientation on the compass. Speakers of this language have a truly remarkable, almost superhuman, sense of direction. Their language has influenced, it has trained, a completely different way of thinking about and moving through physical space. Language, therefore, is not a prison. It is a lens, the lens you are used to, your native language, focuses your attention on certain aspects of reality, like the difference between light and dark blue, or your position on the compass, while letting other aspects remain in the background. This principle, that the words we use can shape our reality, is not just an academic curiosity. It is a profound, practical tool for life. It explains why learning a new language often feels like it is opening your mind. When you learn a language like French or Spanish, you are suddenly forced to learn the difference between the informal you, tu, and the formal you, vous, or usted. This linguistic rule, which does not exist in modern English, forces you to think about the social hierarchy, the level of intimacy, and the power dynamic in every single conversation you have. You are learning a new way to see your social world. This also applies to your inner monologue. The words you choose to label your own experiences can change how you feel about them. Psychologists call this emotional granularity, the ability to find a precise label for your feelings To distinguish between feeling anxious, disappointed, frustrated, or angry is a powerful skill. A person who just says, "I feel bad," has a blurry, unmanageable problem. A person who can say, "I feel disappointed," has a specific, labeled concept and can begin to think about its cause and its solution. The words you use become the handles for your thoughts. This is why calling a situation a problem versus calling it a challenge or an opportunity can genuinely change how your brain approaches it. You are literally framing the concept and guiding your own subsequent thoughts. We have now seen that our minds are not just libraries of concepts, but that we also possess this incredibly powerful tool, language, that acts as the scaffolding for our thought. We use it to label, to categorize, to communicate, and to manipulate our ideas. We now have all the pieces in place. We have our organized file folders, concepts, and we have the powerful software, language to combine and manage them. We are, at last, ready to use this system to do something complex. We are ready to take our concepts and our language and apply them to a situation where the answer is not clear. We are ready to tackle a challenge. This brings us to the cognitive study of one of the highest forms of thinking, the mental steps we take when we are faced with a difficulty and we must find a path to a solution. Our next lesson is on the cognitive processes in problem solving. Number 5. Cognitive processes in problem solving. In our lessons so far, we have carefully assembled the components of our mind. We have explored the vast library of memory. We have seen how we acquire knowledge through learning. We have organized that knowledge into efficient file folders called concepts, and we have discovered the powerful software of language that we use to label and manipulate those concepts. We now have, in essence, our complete mental toolkit. We are, at last, ready to use this toolkit to do something truly complex. We are ready to face a challenge. We are ready to apply our concepts and our language and our memories to a situation where the answer is not obvious and the path to a solution is not clear. This lesson explores one of the highest forms of thinking. We will examine the mental steps we take when we move from a state of difficulty to a state of resolution. This is the cognitive study of problem solving. Let us begin with a clear definition. Problem solving is the mental process, or the thinking, that we engage in when we need to move from an initial state, the problem, to a goal state, the solution, and the path to do so is not immediately obvious. It is the act of finding a way around an obstacle, of navigating a challenge. When faced with a problem, our minds do not just guess at random. We deploy strategies. Cognitive science has found that these strategies fall into two very broad categories. The first category is an algorithm. An algorithm is a methodical, logical, step-by-step procedure that, if you follow it correctly, guarantees a solution. Think of a mathematical formula, like $ area equals length times width $. This is an algorithm. If you have the length and the width, and you follow this procedure, you are 100% guaranteed to get the correct area. Another example is a detailed instruction manual for assembling furniture. It is a step-by-step procedure that guarantees a result. Eventually, algorithms are reliable, but they can be very slow and rigid. The second, and far more common, category is a heuristic. A heuristic is a mental shortcut. It is a rule of thumb, a simple, efficient thinking strategy that has worked for you in the past. It is a best guess. Heuristics are the opposite of algorithms in many ways. They are incredibly fast. They are flexible. They save us an enormous amount of mental energy, but they are not guaranteed. They are error-prone. They are the good enough solution that our brain uses to navigate a complex world quickly. Let's dive deeper into these two strategies, because this distinction is central to understanding how you think. Algorithms, as we said, are about certainty. If you want to unscramble the anagram sployohcyg crine, you could use an algorithm. You could try every single possible combination of those 10 letters, starting with sployohcyg, then sployohcgy, and so on. This is a brute force algorithm. The problem is, there are 3,628,800 possible combinations. You would find the answer, psychology, but it would take you days. This is why our brains, which are built for efficiency, not perfection, almost always prefer to use heuristics. To solve that same anagram, your brain instantly uses heuristics. It knows, based on its language concept file, that PSY is a common starting blend and CH is a common pair. It knows that YGO looks like the end of a word. You are not trying every combination. You are trying the most likely ones. You are taking a shortcut. Let's look at 2 of the most common heuristics your mind uses every day. The first is means-end analysis. This is, perhaps, the most common heuristic of all. It is a simple process. First, you identify the difference between your current state and your goal state. Then, you ask yourself, what one step can I take to reduce that difference? You take that step, which creates a new current state and a new, smaller problem. And you just repeat the process. Your current state is, I am hungry. Your goal state is, I am full. The difference is a lack of food. A step to reduce that difference is to go to the kitchen. That is a sub-goal. Now you're in the kitchen. Your new problem, no prepared food. Your new sub-goal, open the refrigerator. You are breaking a large problem into a series of small manageable steps, each one reducing the distance to your goal. A second powerful heuristic is working backward. This is just what it sounds like. You start at the goal state and you work your way backward to the initial state. This is incredibly useful for planning. I need to be at the airport for my flight at 8. The goal, to be there by 8. I must leave my house by 7, working backward. To leave by 7, I must wake up by 6, working backward. You have just solved your morning plan problem by starting from the end. But, because heuristics are shortcuts, they can also fail us. Sometimes they lead us into traps. Cognitive science has identified several common obstacles to problem solving. The most famous is functional fixedness. This is a cognitive bias, a blind spot, where you become unable to see an object as having any function other than its usual or customary one. The classic experiment is the Dunker candle problem. You are given 3 items: a candle, a box of thumbtacks, and a book of matches. Your problem: you must attach the candle to a corkboard wall so that it can burn safely without dripping wax on the floor. Most people try to tack the candle directly to the wall, which fails. Or they try to melt the candle's wax and stick it to the wall, which also fails. They are stuck. Why? Because they are experiencing functional fixedness. They see the box only as a container for the tacks. The solution, which requires a flash of insight, is to overcome this fixedness. You must reconceptualize the box. It is not just a container. It is also a platform. The solution is to dump the tacks out of the box, use a tack to nail the box to the wall, and then place the candle on the box as a new shelf. You had to break your concept of box to find the solution. A similar obstacle is mental set. This is the tendency to approach a new problem with the same strategy, or mental set, that has worked for you in the past. This is usually efficient, but it can blind you to a simpler, better solution. It is the, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail problem. Your brain gets stuck in a rut using an old, familiar heuristic when a new, creative one is needed. These processes, algorithms, heuristics, and obstacles are not just for laboratory puzzles. They are your life. You use an algorithm when you follow a new recipe, step by step, guaranteeing you will make the dish correctly. You use a heuristic when you don't have a recipe, and you just eyeball the ingredients based on what has usually worked in the past. When you are trying to write an essay, and you are staring at a blank page, the initial state, you use means-end analysis. My goal is a finished essay. The difference is 1,000 empty words. A sub-goal to reduce that difference is to write an outline. When your car won't start, you might fall into a mental set. You check the battery, because that's what it was last time. You might be completely blind to the new problem, which is that you are simply out of gas. Becoming a better problem solver, then, is a twofold process. It is about building a larger toolkit of useful heuristics and algorithms, so you have more strategies to choose from. But, just as importantly, it is about metacognition, thinking about your thinking. It is about learning to recognize when you are stuck. It is about learning to ask, am I stuck in a mental set? Is there a simpler way? Or, am I experiencing functional fixedness? Is there another way I can use the tools I have? It is the ability to break your old patterns and see the problem and the tools in a new light. We have now seen how we apply our cognitive toolkit to solve a problem. We have seen that this process involves generating different strategies, using an algorithm, or trying various heuristics, like means-end analysis or working backward. But this very process of problem solving almost always creates a new, related challenge. You have identified several possible paths. You have a few different heuristics you could try. You have a few potential solutions. Now, you must choose. Which strategy is the best one to try first? Which solution is the most likely to be correct? Which path has the highest probability of success and the lowest risk of failure? This act of evaluating your options, of assessing the likelihoods, and of selecting one path from many moves us from the realm of problem solving into the very heart of judgment and decision-making. Judgment and decision-making. In our exploration of problem solving, we saw how our minds generate possible strategies, algorithms, and heuristics to find a path to a solution. We saw how we can break a large problem down into smaller, manageable steps, or how we can work backward from our goal. But this very success, this ability to generate multiple options, creates a new and constant challenge. We must, inevitably, choose. Which path is the best? Which strategy is the most likely to succeed? Which solution carries the least risk or the greatest reward? Every day, from the moment you wake, you are faced with a series of these forks in the road. Some are small, what to eat, what to wear. Some are large, which job to take, who to trust. This act of evaluating your options, of assessing likelihoods, and of selecting one alternative from many, is the heart of our lesson tonight. We move from the realm of generating solutions to the cognitive act of making a choice. This is the study of judgment and decision-making. Let us first be clear about our two key terms, for they are slightly different. Judgment is the cognitive process of forming an opinion, or an estimate, or an evaluation. It is the act of assessing the probability of an event, or the value of an object. How likely is it to rain today? Is this a good investment? Is this person trustworthy? These are all acts of judgment. Decision-making is the subsequent process of choosing one course of action from a set of alternatives, usually based on the judgments you have just made. You judge that it is likely to rain, so you decide to bring an umbrella. For many years, traditional economic and philosophical models operated on the assumption that humans are rational actors. This rational choice theory proposed that when faced with a decision, we would carefully and logically examine all the evidence, we would weigh all the pros and cons for every option, and we would consistently select the one option that offers us the maximum benefit or utility. But this is not what we do. The most important discovery in this field, a revolutionary set of ideas that earned the psychologist Daniel Kahneman a Nobel Prize in economics, was that humans are not perfectly rational. He, along with his longtime collaborator Amos Tversky, demonstrated that our thinking is limited. We are, as some have said, cognitive misers. We try to save our mental energy. We don't have the time, the energy, or the working memory capacity to run a full, logical, statistical analysis for every one of the hundreds of choices we make each day. So, our brains default to a different strategy. Instead of using slow, deliberate logic, our minds rely heavily on those heuristics. Those mental shortcuts we met in our last lesson to make judgments quickly and efficiently. These are the rules of thumb that allow us to navigate a complex world without being paralyzed by analysis. They are fast, they are frugal, and, most of the time, they serve us very well. But, as we will now see, this reliance on shortcuts can lead us astray in very specific and very predictable ways. Let us explore two of these most powerful and most common heuristics that shape your judgments every day. The first is called the availability heuristic. This is a mental shortcut where we judge the frequency or the likelihood of an event based on how easily an example of it comes to our mind. How available is it in our memory? Our brain uses a simple, good enough rule. If it is easy to recall, it must be common or important. The classic example of this is our perception of risk. Many people have a greater fear of flying in an airplane than they do of driving in a car. But, statistically, driving in a car is vastly more dangerous. Why do we make this error in judgment? Because of how our memory works. Plane crashes, though incredibly rare, are dramatic, vivid, emotional, and receive enormous media coverage. These dramatic images are highly available in our memory. Car crashes, however, are so common, so mundane, that they are rarely newsworthy. They are not available. We therefore overestimate the risk of the vivid, easily recalled event and underestimate the risk of the common but less memorable one. Our judgment is skewed by the availability of the memory. Now, let us examine a second, equally powerful shortcut, the representativeness heuristic. This is a mental shortcut we use when we need to judge the probability that something or someone belongs to a particular category. To do this, a rational mind would look at the statistics, chi, the base rates, but our heuristic-driven mind does not. Instead, it asks a simpler, faster question: how well does this person or event match our prototype or our stereotype, the two of that category? This, as you see, links directly back to our lesson on concepts. The most famous illustration of this comes from Kahneman and Tversky. They would give people a short personality sketch. Let us imagine one. Steve is very shy and withdrawn, invariably helpful, but with little interest in people or in the world of reality. A meek and tidy soul, he has a need for order and structure and a passion for detail. Now, is Steve more likely to be a farmer or a librarian? Most people will instantly and confidently say librarian. Why? Because this description, this sketch, is highly representative of our cultural prototype for a librarian. It matches our mental file. But this judgment ignores a crucial piece of information. This is what Kahneman and Tversky called base rate neglect. We ignore the simple, statistical fact that there are many, many times more farmers in the world than there are male librarians. The statistical base rate makes farmer a much more probable answer. But our mind, taking the shortcut, ignores the statistics and goes with the better story. It goes with the match. This is a perfect example of how the representativeness heuristic can lead to a fundamental and logical error in judgment. These heuristics, these silent, automatic shortcuts, are not just interesting laboratory puzzles. They are operating beneath our conscious awareness every single day, guiding our most important, life-altering decisions. In finance, the availability heuristic is at play when we decide to invest in a hot new stock. We do this not because we have analyzed its fundamental value, but because we have heard a lot about it recently from friends or on the news. It is mentally available, so we judge it as a good bet, even if the statistics show it is a poor one. In health, the representativeness heuristic can cause great anxiety. We feel a strange symptom, and we search for it online. We find a rare, terrible disease, and we see that our symptoms, "This sounds just like me," seem to match the description. We fall into the trap of base rate neglect, ignoring the statistical fact that this disease is 1 in a million, and judging that we have it simply because it feels representative. These shortcuts are the very basis of snap judgments, first impressions, and stereotyping. We see a person. They fit a prototype based on their clothes, or their accent, or their background, and our mind, rapidly and unconsciously, decides what category they belong to and judges their character. We are, in essence, cognitive misers. Our brains are hardwired by evolution to prefer a fast, easy, good enough answer over a slow, difficult, and logical one. This efficiency is a survival trait, but in our complex, modern, data-filled world, it can also be a liability. We have now seen that our minds are brilliant, but they are not perfect. We have seen that these powerful, efficient shortcuts, these heuristics, that save us so much time and energy, also come with a cost. And this cost is not random. The errors we make, like neglecting base rates or being swayed by a vivid story, are not just random mistakes. They are systematic, predictable errors. They are, in a sense, bugs in our mental software. They are common, predictable patterns of deviation from rational judgment. This leads us directly to our next lesson. We will move from the causes, the heuristics, to the effects. We will create a catalogue of these common, predictable flaws in our thinking. We will explore the fascinating and often humbling world of cognitive biases. Cognitive biases and errors in thinking. Welcome back. In our last lesson, we explored the world of judgment and decision-making. We discovered a profound truth about our minds. We are not perfectly rational. To navigate a complex world with limited time and energy, our brains do not rely on slow, perfect logic. Instead, they rely heavily on fast, efficient rules of thumb called heuristics. We saw how the availability heuristic, if it's easy to recall, it must be common, and the representativeness heuristic. If it matches my stereotype, it must belong to that category. Help us make instant judgments. But we also hinted that this efficiency comes at a cost. These shortcuts, these good enough solutions, are not just faster. They also have built-in flaws. The errors they produce are not random. They are systematic, predictable, and universal. This lesson is about those flaws. We move now from the cause, the heuristics, to the effect. We are going to open a catalogue of the most common, predictable bugs in our mental software, the systematic ways our minds deviate from logic. This is the fascinating and often humbling study of cognitive biases. So, what is a cognitive bias? A cognitive bias is a systematic error in thinking. It is a reliable, predictable pattern of deviation from rational, objective judgment. Let us be very clear on this. A bias is not a mistake in the way that a simple math error is a mistake. It is a feature of your mind's design. These biases are the unavoidable side effects of your brain's reliance on those efficient, energy-saving heuristics. If your brain's software is designed to take shortcuts, then a cognitive bias is the predictable wrong turn that this shortcut will always make you susceptible to. You cannot just turn them off. You cannot simply decide to be unbiased. These processes are fast, they are automatic, and they operate, for the most part, beneath the level of your conscious awareness. They feel like correct, rational, intuitive judgments. The goal of this lesson, and, indeed, of cognitive science, is not to eliminate these biases. That is likely impossible. The goal is to illuminate them, to bring them into the light, so that we can, with effort, learn to recognize their signature, and perhaps, just perhaps, pause and choose a more deliberate, logical path. Let us explore two of the most powerful and pervasive biases that shape your reality every single day. We will begin with the mother of all biases, the one that is perhaps the most powerful and the most difficult to overcome. This is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency, the automatic, unconscious tendency, to seek out, to interpret, and to recall information in a way that confirms your pre-existing beliefs or hypotheses. Notice, it has three separate parts. First, we seek confirming evidence. When you have a belief, my political party is the best one. You do not go to the internet and type, evidence that my party is wrong. You type, reasons why my party is right. You seek information that supports your view, and you avoid information that challenges it. This is the engine of the filter bubble and the echo chamber. Second, we interpret evidence to fit our beliefs. When we are presented with ambiguous information, a study, a news report, or a person's mixed behavior, we will, unconsciously, spin that evidence so that it matches what we already believe. A person who likes a politician will see their ambiguous speech as clever and nuanced. A person who dislikes them will see the exact same speech as shady and evasive. We are not seeing the evidence objectively. We are seeing it through the lens of our belief. Third, we recall information that fits our beliefs. Our memory is not a perfect video recorder. It is a storyteller, and it prefers a coherent story. We have a selective, biased memory. We tend to remember all the times our beliefs were proven right, and we conveniently forget all the times we were wrong. This is a self-perpetuating, self-sealing loop. Your beliefs lead you to seek evidence, which you interpret to fit your beliefs. And then you remember, selectively, the evidence that fit. It is a feedback cycle that makes your existing beliefs stronger and stronger over time, regardless of whether they are actually true. Now, let us examine a second, and equally human, bias. This is the hindsight bias. This is, simply, the "I knew it all along" phenomenon. Hindsight bias is the tendency, after an event has occurred, to overestimate your ability to have predicted it beforehand. Once you know the outcome, the entire messy, uncertain, and unpredictable chain of events leading up to it is cleaned up in your mind. It is rewritten into a simple, neat, and inevitable story. Before a major sports game, you might feel it is a 50-over-50 toss-up, but the day after your team wins, you might find yourself saying, "I knew they were going to win. It was obvious. Their defense was just too strong." Or, after a surprising election, or a stock market crash, they will appear and they will explain with perfect clarity why that outcome was inevitable. But before the event, their predictions were far less certain. This bias is not just about bragging. It is a genuine misremembering of your own past mental state. You are not lying when you say you knew it all along. Your brain has actually rewritten the memory. to make your past predictions match the present reality. And this has a serious consequence. If you believe the past was obvious and predictable, it prevents you from accurately learning from it. You cannot learn from your mistakes if your mind automatically rewrites them and tells you that you were right all along. These biases are not academic theories, they are the water you swim in. Confirmation bias is the engine of political polarization. It is why two people can look at the exact same set of facts and come to two diametrically opposed conclusions. Their brains are not processing the facts. They are using the facts to defend their existing beliefs, their identity. This bias affects your relationships. As you look for evidence that your first impression of someone was correct, it affects your financial decisions, as you seek the good news about a bad investment you made and ignore the warning signs. Hindsight bias is just as pervasive. It profoundly affects how we judge the decisions of others. We judge a doctor's difficult, in-the-moment decision based on the outcome we now know. How could they not have seen that? We ask. Forgetting that, at the moment of the decision, the outcome was just one of many possibilities. It makes us harsh critics of others, and it makes us dangerously overconfident in our own judgments about the future. If our minds are this flawed, this prone to systematic error, what hope do we have? We cannot just decide to be logical. We cannot just try harder. The answer is not to stop the automatic, biased first thought. The answer is to build a new habit. It is to build a second thought. The answer lies in awareness. By knowing that confirmation bias exists, you can, with great conscious effort, choose to seek out one piece of disconfirming evidence. You can force yourself to read an article from the other side. By knowing that hindsight bias exists, you can, when evaluating a past decision, deliberately pause and force yourself to write down all the things that could have happened, but did not. This requires a system, a manager, to oversee your own thinking, to check your own work. It requires you to step outside of your immediate, intuitive thoughts and to look at them as an object of study. This, as we will see, is a skill, and it has a name. Do you know what you know about me? We have now completed our tour, from the foundations of perception to the libraries of memory to the engines of learning, and finally to the complex and often flawed processes of thinking. We have arrived at a humbling conclusion. Our minds are not perfect instruments of logic. They are efficient, shortcut-taking survival machines, filled with hidden biases, like confirmation bias and hindsight bias, that warp our reality in systematic ways. This leads us to our final and perhaps most important lesson. If our own minds, our own thoughts, are this unreliable, how can we ever hope to achieve clarity? How can we ever catch ourselves in the act of being biased? How can we self-correct? We need a manager. We need a CEO for our own mind, a cognitive function that stands above the other processes and monitors them. We need the mind's ability to observe itself. In our final lesson, we will tie all of this together by studying this remarkable human capacity, the profound ability to think about our own thinking. This is the study of metacognition. Metacognition, thinking about thinking. Welcome to our final and most important lesson in this cognitive science course. We have traveled a long and profound path together. We have journeyed from the raw data of perception through the complex libraries of memory, the powerful engines of learning, and the intricate, shortcut-taking processes of thinking. In our last lesson, we arrived at a humbling and perhaps unsettling conclusion. Our minds are not perfect instruments of logic. They are brilliant, efficient survival machines. But they are also deeply flawed. They are filled with built-in, systematic bugs called cognitive biases, like the confirmation bias that seeks to prove us right, and the hindsight bias that convinces us we were never wrong. This leads us to a final, critical question. If our own thinking is this unreliable, if our own mind software is this buggy, how can we ever hope to achieve clarity? How can we ever catch ourselves in the act of being biased? How can we ever improve? We need a manager. We need a CEO for our own mind. We need a part of our thinking that is not in the system, but stands above it and monitors it. In this final lesson, we will explore this remarkable, uniquely human capacity. We will tie everything together by studying the mind's profound ability to observe itself. This is the study of metacognition. Let us begin with the term itself. The prefix meta comes from the Greek, meaning beyond, or above, or after. So, metacognition is, quite literally, cognition about cognition. Or, more simply, it is the act of thinking about your own thinking. If cognition is the mind's software, the programs for memory, attention, and problem-solving, then metacognition is the executive user. It is the part of you that can run those programs, check those programs, and update those programs. Let us use a final analogy. Imagine your mind is a large, busy company. You have all the workers we have discussed. You have the intake department, sensation and perception. You have the spotlight operator, attention. You have the active workbench, working memory. You have the vast library, long-term memory. You have the strategy team, problem solving. And you have the fast-paced judgment team, heuristics. Metacognition is the chief executive officer, the CEO, or the executive manager of this entire company. The CEO's job is not to do the work, but to oversee it. The CEO understands what each department does, monitors its performance, and directs its strategy, all to make sure the entire company is working efficiently and toward the right goal. This is what you are doing when you pause and ask yourself, am I understanding this? Or, what is the best way for me to learn this? Or, why am I feeling so strongly about this? You are stepping into your meta level. You are being the manager. Cognitive scientists generally divide this manager's job into two distinct components. The first component is metacognitive knowledge. This is what your manager knows. This is the user manual that you have, through experience, written about your own, specific, individual mind. It is your awareness of your own cognitive strengths and your weaknesses. Examples of metacognitive knowledge include: I know that I am terrible at remembering people's names, but I am very good at remembering their faces. Knowledge about your memory. I know that my attention span is very short. I can only really focus for about 25 minutes at a time. Knowledge about your attention. I know that I learn best, not by reading, but by drawing a diagram or by explaining the concept to someone else. Knowledge about your learning. I know that when I feel anxious, I tend to make pessimistic judgments. Knowledge about your biases. This is the knowledge part. The entire course you have just listened to has been designed to give you better metacognitive knowledge, to give you the concepts and labels to understand your own mental staff. But knowledge is not enough. The manager must also act. The second, and more active, component is metacognitive regulation or metacognitive control. This is what your manager does. This is the active, real-time management of your own thinking. This process is often broken down into 3 stages: planning, monitoring, and evaluating. First, there is planning. This is the before stage. Your manager steps in before you begin a mental task and sets a strategy. What is my goal here? How will I approach this problem? What strategies, based on my metacognitive knowledge, are most likely to work for me? How much time will I budget for this? A student with good metacognition doesn't just start studying. They plan. They say, "This is a big chapter." My plan is to read one section, then stop, and write a one-sentence summary before moving to the next. Second, there is monitoring. This is the during stage. This is perhaps the most critical part. Your manager is actively watching your other mental processes in real time as they work. How am I doing right now? Am I understanding this? Is this plan working? My attention is drifting. I need to bring it back. I have been reading this same paragraph for 5 minutes. I am not understanding it. I need to change my strategy. This is also where we catch our biases. This is the inner voice that says, "Wait, I am only looking for evidence that I am right. I am falling into confirmation bias. Let me deliberately pause and force myself to look for the other side of the argument." Finally, there is evaluating. This is the after stage. Once the task is complete, your manager steps back to review the performance. How did I do? Did I achieve my goal? How accurate was my judgment? My plan to write summaries worked very well. My plan to study late at night failed. I will do that differently next time. This is how you learn, not just the subject, but how to learn better. This is how your manager gets smarter and updates your metacognitive knowledge for the future. This final concept is the key to it all. It is what separates expert learners from novice learners. It is not that expert learners are just smarter. It is not that they have a bigger, hard drive. It is that they have a much better executive manager. They are high in metacognition. A novice learner, when they fail, says, "I am just bad at this." An expert learner, when they fail, says, "My strategy was wrong. How can I change my approach?" They are thinking about their thinking. This is the skill that allows you to take all the knowledge from our past lessons and put it to work. You now know about the forgetting curve. Your metacognitive manager can now plan to use spaced repetition to defeat it. You now know about functional fixedness. Your manager can now monitor your problem solving and ask, "Am I stuck on this object's one simple function?" This is the path to self-correction, to intellectual humility, and to true lifelong learning. It is the ability to step outside of your own immediate, automatic, biased thoughts, to look at them, to question them, and, when necessary, to change them. It is the ultimate tool for improving your own mind. Our journey through the foundations of cognitive science is now complete. We have traveled from the very first step, the raw, simple data of sensation. We saw how our mind, through perception, actively builds our reality. We followed that information as it was selected by the narrow beam of attention and held, for a moment, on the active workbench of working memory. We saw how that information, through the deep process of encoding, is saved into the vast, organized libraries of long-term memory, our facts, our skills, and our personal life stories. We then explored the great engines of learning, how we are classically conditioned by association, how our actions are operantly shaped by consequences, and how we learn so powerfully by observing others. Finally, we explored the vast world of thinking, from the file folders of concepts and the software of language, to the strategies of problem solving, the shortcut, errors of judgment, the predictable flaws of our biases, and now, at last, the manager that oversees it all, metacognition. You have, in this lesson, built a new metacognitive map of your own mind. The user manual is now complete. There is nothing more to learn tonight. You have given your mind the greatest gift, the knowledge of itself. Let this information settle. Let it consolidate, moving from your workbench into that deep, permanent library as you now let go and drift deeper into a calm, quiet, and truly restorative sleep. Your mind has done its work. Now, it can rest. Good night.